I saw your talk at DEF CON a few months ago. And, I love DEF CON. I've been going to DEF CON for years now. I've been going since DEF CON 22, which I know is not nearly as long as a lot of people. But I've seen a lot of great speakers over the years. And I always end up like wanted to hear more from them. Uh, and it's sad because, obviously DEF CON, they've got 3 days, but they got to cram a bunch of speakers in
Yep.
there. And, uh, you don't really get to hear their backstory. So when I heard Sam Bent speak at DEF CON 30 um, about what you were doing, it blew my mind. So I did some research on you, and it turns out not only are you a DEF CON speaker, you're also a paralegal,
Hmm.
prisoner advocate. You're an author of a book called Compassionate Release, which is available on Amazon.
Yep.
I will stick that in the show notes. Um, you're also, though, a former darknet vendor and one of 35 people arrested in the United States' first ever nationwide undercover operation targeting darknet vendors in an operation called Operation Dark Gold. Just totally fascinating.
Yeah,
Absolutely
that's
fascinating.
that's what they like to say. Yeah, that's that's how it goes. I mean, you gotta try to find probable cause for something, right? Like at the end of the day,
Of course.
yeah. That's definitely not the case at all. And like if you read my docket sheet, you can. It's very easy to verify that. You know.
I'm really interested in hearing your story. I don't even know where to begin with this. There's so much to unpack here. Maybe the best thing that we can do, and correct me if I'm off here, but maybe we can just start at the beginning. What led you to getting into being a darknet vendor? Like, what was the situation? What was the world like that led you to that decision?
So I was with just a nightmare of a woman, and I was with her for like 10 years. But she had ended up like letting me know that we got into an argument about our middle child not eating peas. Like she said I gave her too many peas when I made her plate, and that was right. So like it's like there's ridiculous arguments, and like that led, and she was like, you're an asshole. That was that. But we had 3 kids. So I had at the time I had a computer service where like I did like really basic stuff, reformatting and like really kind of low level or high level cybersecurity stuff on a residential.
CompTIA A plus kind of stuff.
Yeah, like on a residential level, and for some small businesses, but it really wasn't anything big. So I had done that, but we had moved, and when we had moved to this new house, it's in Vermont, and like we get so accustomed nowadays to having the internet that it's like where where isn't the internet? I mean, like, and like you see, like Johnny Long, he's in Africa, and they got computers there. I mean, they got sneaker net, where it's like if you don't have the internet, you got guys walking with these, from one village to another. So like
Unpack that. What do you got there? Oh, it's a USB
oh
key.
yeah, it's just USB key.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Like they got sneaker net, so they might have like KA light on that loaded with courses, but like everyone has the ability to access the internet at some point. So like we're so spoiled here in America that like that's not even a thought when I look at a house or an apartment. Like I just automatically ignorantly assume that it has that ability. And like this place that I had moved to didn't. But what was crazy was it's the address was 3585 Darling Hill Road. Or I'm sorry, 3582 Darling Hill Road. And it's a big red house with a 2-car garage. It's attached, but it's at the top of a mountain. And it like when you look out, you see mountains all around you, ranges of mountains, and you're one of the ones at the top of
That's
the
cool.
mountain. Yeah. It's just beautiful. And it was like 1100 a month. It was two, three, four, 5 bedrooms, 2 baths, like a living room. Like it is beautiful, beautiful antique home. Plus, the kicker of it was that like at the end of the day, in the front of the home, on the inside the grass, there's a memorial to the Green Mountain Boys, which were basically like they were a bunch of dudes, back in the revolution that would they lived up here in Vermont, and the National Guard in Vermont actually still uses their flag. But these guys would go
That's cool.
like they would go down to mass and they would kill a bunch of redcoats and come up, and like they hated the government. You know what I mean? So I was like, I that part I loved. I love that. That 20.
That's perfect. It embodies that rebel attitude, right?
So I mean I was making moonshine at the time, but I was doing it just for fun. I was doing it because I
How do you
enjoyed doing
make
it.
that?
So it's
Do you
just
do you make that moonshine that tastes like, apple pie and different stuff like that?
yeah. So you might be able to find it if you look up Two Happy Times Two. I had where did I put? I put the slide somewhere. Maybe it's in my presentation.
2 Happy Times 2 is one of your old, handles, right?
Yeah.
Are you still operating under that handle?
I do on one of my very small YouTube channels, which I wasn't doing anything with until recently. Like I know a lot of tutorials that I find on YouTube. It's like some moron talking for 5 minutes about some product they want to sell, and it's like, dude, I just need to know how to reset the transcript in Premiere Pro. Like it's a 10-second thing, like I don't want to hear
Yeah.
about your website and your sponsor and are you kidding me?
You gotta stretch that out, man. You
So
gotta stretch it
I
out.
mean, with that, like I try to give back to the community. So like I'm leaving the timestamps, and I'm like, hey, he gets to it here at 4 minutes and 30 seconds. you know, um, um,
Right on.
but yeah, so the house, it was the Green Mountain Boys used to be in it, so I really like that house for that reason. Plus, it's 1,100 a month for a whole
Yeah, that's a
home.
great deal.
Yeah, 15 acres,
That's a
like
great deal for a house.
crazy. So
15 acres?
yeah,
Holy
yep,
crap.
yep. So if you
You hiding bodies out
so
there.
it was gorgeous. So in the during the summertime, you would have like these really wealthy to do people that would have like rollerblades and like the ski poles, and they would be going down the street, like during the summertime.
Yeah.
Cross country skiing in the summertime. I thought that was wild. And then in the wintertime, you see them do it through our backyard because they have this thing called Northeast Kingdom Trails, which is this big thing in Vermont, massive trail. And,
Mhm.
all the affluent people would go. So they're either, going through the front yard or they're going through the backyard, which kind of freaked me out, especially like, if you're committing federal offenses on a daily basis, like perimeter
Yeah,
security is like
see you see random people, like, moving through your yard.
I mean, I,
Yeah,
I
that would
saw, and then down the street they used to do weddings. So like there would be on occasion I would look out and I would see like at my garage I would see like a bride and a groom getting their picture taken, and I'm like, yeah, you just, and I'm like, I'm distilling moonshine or I'm harvesting cannabis,
So was that the start of you heading down the path of things that
Yeah,
may
yeah. So
run the line of legality,
yeah,
if I
so
can be as
that's
polite as possible?
like that thing with her is what really motivated it, because I was like, if I'm sorry, it's ironic, but like if I was like, if I have to go somewhere, like if I'm gonna move out, I'm not gonna move out to some shitty ass apartment. Like I grew up in southeastern Mass, and I lived in Rhode Island for a little bit, but always the bad parts, right? Like I lived in Hartford, Connecticut for a little bit. It's a fucking horrible place, shitty ass place, depending on where you live in it. But so I lived in a lot of really crappy spots in my life. So I was like, I really didn't want that for my kids, and that's why I lived in Vermont,
Yeah.
because it's great, So with that, I was like, well, I don't want to have to move to like, one of the towns that are like, it's full of dope heads or junkies or whatever, and have my kids be exposed to that. So like that was my brilliant idea, was like, well, what I'll do is I'll start up this business, and I'll kill it, and I'll make like 150 grand. Then I'll walk away. I'll buy a house.
So, did you just have did you just have this idea one day, or you said you were involved in tech prior to this, so you
Yeah.
you must have had some understanding of, like, how Tor worked,
Hmm.
how the darknet worked.
Yep.
Did you, like, set up your own hidden service and do this, or did you operate off of, like, Silk Road or something?
Yeah, so I remember when Silk Road came out. I remember when Bitcoin came out, and like we all like thought it was a joke. Like me and my friend mined like 250 coins, And
There you
I was like,
go.
this is retarded. I was like, this is a waste of time, man. I'm gonna go play like Morrowind or something, like, and I just
Yeah.
deleted the wallet,
Oh, God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's story as old as time, man. Story as old as time. You'd have been a bajillionaire
Oh
right
yeah,
now.
yeah, yeah. Even now with it in the toilet, yeah. I mean, I would have exchanged it for Monero, so I mean, I would have still been good.
Yeah.
um,
Okay, so you're living with this
mhm.
woman, things aren't going great. You've got this massive plot of land, and you decide that you're going to set up this darknet
Mhm.
business. You're gonna make some sales, make some fast cash, and then you're going to cash out, buy a house, or pay off the house you're in, and live happily ever after. Is that the idea?
Yeah, so it's like that. So the issue here is a lot of people would be like, "Well, that's really stupid," I mean, and absolutely can't argue with logic. So, um, but the thing is, like, when you make a decision, especially when it's an emotional decision, especially when you're not a very emotional person, like, it's it really screws you over because at the end of the day, like, I already know about the technology. So my question wasn't should I do it? My question is, how do I do it effectively? How do I have perfect OPSEC? And the answer to that is research your ass off. Like look at what the feds have already done, get on Pacer, read, and study. And same as anything else.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's an interesting part of your story,
mhm.
actually. That's something that I wanted to talk about with you. I have it here in my
Yep.
notes, and it's funny when I was in the military for 6 years, and when I was in, this is from '05 to 2011 timeframe. When I was in, we often said that one training manual or whatever for maybe a tank or something may not be classified, but when you glob them together, you end up with classified information. Um, and I was reading your story, and obviously, like I said, I listened to your DefCon talk live when you were doing it, and you had made mention that you were using their own documentation against them.
Hmm.
Which I found fascinating. We don't have to get into that right now if you don't want to, but I,
Sun
I
Tzu for
definitely
the
want to talk to
win.
you about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's yeah,
On the shoulders of
it
giants,
really is
man.
knowing your enemy. It really is knowing your enemy,
Yeah. Yeah.
It's true. It's shocking to me, how effective that is too, using documentation against your target, whether it be the feds or whatever. Um, a few years ago, I had an idea for something that somebody actually built. A few years after I had the idea, I wish I had built it myself. I was thinking about when I was in the military, I was actually a military police officer, and we had these, I believe they're called opticons, and they sit on your dashboard, and they trigger the traffic light when you're driving through it. Um, and I was thinking to myself, it'd be really easy to build that. It's just, just an IR strobe at a certain frequency. And yeah, I literally did what you're saying. I looked up the regulations for it. There were obviously laws around this. There was documentation for it in the state. And yeah, I could have easily built it. I chose not to because I didn't want to end up in a box. So that was, you know,
They're not fun.
but yeah, no, most definitely not. But yeah, they using their own documentation against them is surprisingly effective.
Yeah.
Um, so when you were setting up this business, you talk about how OPSEC was important to
Mhm.
you. What were some of the measures that you took to protect your identity and your location? And it sounds like you did this out of your house.
Yep.
Some may argue that may not be the best OPSEC.
Yeah. So the beauty of it though is that the requirements for actually going in there with a warrant is extremely difficult. So sometimes what you think the best route isn't actually the best route once you do research into it, and that was pretty much where I ended up. Plus, I didn't have resources to go buy a throwaway house, and even if I did, I mean,
Yeah, of
at the end of
course.
the day, even if you have money like that, like now you're going to have to get someone who's there and they look normal. They come in at the right time. They leave for work at the right time. Like that alone is going to be it's going to have a massive overhead, you know? And it's,
Well, even the guy that was running the Silk Road got taken down, and he was using coffee shops,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
If I believe that that was the story.
Yep.
I mean, he had other OPSEC failures,
For sure.
but
Yeah,
I
for
mean, he was
sure.
going to coffee shops. He wasn't doing anything out of his
Yep.
house, and he still ended up getting popped.
Yep.
So, I mean, it's not a perfect system.
Yep. And what's crazy is you still have, at the end of the day, you're always going to have informants and rats, and that's another big to me. So for me, how I see it, like with drug trafficking outside of the dark net, with the system of informants that we have and the assistance that they get for sentence reductions, and I like repeat offenders who will get massive reductions or just no prison time whatsoever for cooperating and putting people in prison. Um, it it's it's a great system for those people who are going in, but I think it does a disservice not only to the the criminal networks, right? And it's like, oh, who cares about them? All right, granted, but it also does a disservice to law enforcement.
It was interesting, during my time as a, military police officer. Half of my time in the service, I was a combat military police officer, so I was, training for Iraq or in Iraq, and, doing warfighting stuff, and then after I got back, I switched over to being, just a normal Leo, working the road, writing traffic tickets, doing drug investigations, things like that. And we had a very common saying that MPs eat their own, and I believe that that's a common saying for police as a whole, um, because it's very easy to mess up, and they have this environment where if you see somebody mess up and you don't say anything, then you're equally as guilty. So they just turn each other in, or so that's one side of it. Or the other side of it is they know what's going to happen, and it's the good old boy system, and they protect themselves to no end.
For sure.
And I've legitimately seen both of those in real life. I know it exists, and at least where I was, it existed at the time. Hopefully not anymore, but that's the world we live in.
Yeah.
Um, what I really want to know is when you set up your business, like, what were the steps that you took? I know we mentioned briefly, we talked about OPSEC.
Hmm.
I'm really interested. So I published an article a couple days ago, leading up to this interview, about Tor, about hidden services, about how it works. I really, so I'm a software engineer. I have a pretty solid understanding about how a lot of this technology works.
Hmm.
But I didn't understand fully uh, the the systems that were in place to make this all happen. So I took the time to deep dive into Tor hidden services and really understand, and it's pretty fascinating how it works. Did you understand that stuff going into it, or were you just kind of like, Tor says they're good, I trust them?
So yeah, like code audits, right, and the security of the code is definitely something that you worry about. So the thing is, with like from how I structured it, it's like when you're starting a chess game, right? When someone makes a move, you like if you read a bunch of books on chess, you can refer in your head and say, what are they doing? What strategy are they using? Where do you think they're going to go next? And in your head, you can say, okay, well, maybe they bring the queen out, or maybe they bring a knight out, or maybe they bring a bishop out. And then you can say, what are they going to do from there? And you can kind of have that hypothetical of those 10,000 different moves that could happen in the next 2 to 3 moves, right? Um, that was kind of my system for like, if I was them, how would I go after me? Looking at the historical data that exists, because those people who understand history are not doomed to repeat it, right? So if I can understand how they worked prior to this, I can have a pretty good estimation of how they're going to work in the future. And obviously, that's not a foolproof system, but if you want a foolproof
That's
system,
pretty
yeah,
good.
if you want a foolproof system, man, go work at McDonald's, because like this isn't the
Yeah.
business for you. You know what I mean? And I would venture to say that anyone that, like, a software engineer, for example, anyone like the reason one of my big motives for giving my talk at DEF CON was mainly centered around letting people know, like, listen, if you guys are intelligent enough to do half the stuff you do on a daily basis, don't ever see this as a viable alternative. You know, it's a story in the form of a warning. Like, we can, we can study infosec and IT and cybersecurity for 15 years before we do this, which I did, and still get owned. And obviously, that's anyone who understands like the hacking culture. That is self-evident right off the it's prima facie.
It really
Like,
is.
you're never safe, and the moment you start thinking you
Yeah.
are, you're fucked. Like, it's
Yeah,
like,
that's the
yeah, and
truth.
it's like
That's
it's
the
like
God's honest truth.
you watch like The Real Hustle, right? And it's all these con men who are doing all these different social engineering cons, and like I've seen it with people, and people are like, oh man, I'd never fall for that. They're an idiot. I'm like, dude, you're the motherfucker they want to meet. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that false sense of
Yeah,
security will they'll rock you right to sleep with that shit. You have no
oh,
idea.
yeah. Absolutely. It happens time and time and time
Yep.
again. Case in point, we were just talking about the guy that was running Silk Road. He had pretty good OPSEC, in a lot of ways. I think he got caught for something stupid
Hmm.
if I recall, but that's the
Yeah.
point. I mean, he definitely was considering his operational security. He was definitely considering ways to circumvent the
Hmm.
system, and he still got caught. And I believe it was over something stupid. It was like logging into an account from his house,
Yep.
or a personal account from the same location. It was something like that. I didn't look it up before this, but um, yeah, I mean, anybody that becomes a target of a nation state is in a losing battle.
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
that's kind of how I look
Yep.
at it. I mean, if you're going up, especially if that nation state has um, predator drones
Hmm.
and highly unethical data collection programs, and they're willing to throw anybody under the bus. I mean, I could go all day about stingrays
Yep.
and the legality of
Yep.
those, and guess
Yep.
what? Those things are used all
Oh
day
yeah,
in and
yeah.
out. So
Hacked femtocells are the shit, man.
yeah. So if you're going up against a nation state, I recommend that you reconsider. Uh, I recommend you
Hmm.
reconsider what you're
Yeah,
doing, because it's really not a great idea.
or just be ready for that fight. Because at the end of the day,
Yeah, that's true
the one
too.
thing that you do have being a small operation like that is maneuverability. So, like, if you're going to fight like that. That nation state is like Tyson or like a oil barge where like you're not going to stop it, ever. But like as Mayweather, you can sure as shit duck it. You can use camouflage, you can use concealment, you can blend in. Like, there are things that you can do to do that, but again, at the end of the day, like, a massive surveillance state. I mean, it's but the other thing I would argue is at the end of the day, while the data collection, all of that is incredible. I mean, Orwell would be rolling over in his grave.
Oh
We've
my
done
god.
things that he
Yes.
couldn't even imagine in his worst nightmares, or fantasies.
Yes.
So, like that said, at the end of the day, it's crazy that if we know enough about technology, we can still have some level of anonymity, right? Like I can drive down the road, and you might have like license plate readers and facial recognition systems, built into the highway. But like I can get infrared LEDs and put it into a bill on a cap with a battery pack, and you're not going to see my face. So, like, there are countermeasures for it. You just have to know them. It's like, if you're going to fight your enemy, you need to know how your enemy fights. And if you don't know how your enemy fights, you have no business on the battlefield. You shouldn't even be there, because you're going to get owned and destroyed in ways that you didn't even know existed. And that's one of the worst things. It's like when I first started out learning about cybersecurity, you hop on, and, you're on a budget. So you're downloading stuff on like the Pirate Bay, and, you know, you get owned a million times. And you're like, how did I get
Don't
owned?
download things on the Pirate
How,
Bay,
how did I
please.
get owned? It's like, and then you grow and you
Well,
evolve, and you learn there's IP torrents,
what's crazy is it doesn't even have to be high-tech solutions either. I mean,
No.
yeah, there are a million high-tech solutions out there, and I guarantee there's ones that we've never heard of and would, make our skin crawl if we heard about it.
For sure.
But what was shocking to me, and I'm sure you remember it, were the Hong Kong riots a few years ago. All those young people that were protesting
Hmm.
China's grip on Hong Kong. Um, and they were using really interesting tactics to identify protesters. Did you see them? They were spraying them with like blue ink and then and then tracking like people that had this blue ink on them because obviously if you had it on you then you were there, right?
Yeah, the
um
value of your social contract, or their social contracts that they have there, where it's like, who supports the government, who doesn't. Their values like
yeah.
plummeting. Yeah, and
Oh yeah,
I think we have like a really soft version of that here. But what's crazy is like
we
we
do,
also have stuff here
and we're
that,
trending in that direction.
yeah, but we also have stuff here that doesn't exist elsewhere. Like I think there's one other country in the world where they're actually allowed to advertise pharmaceuticals on TV. Like ask your doctor about,
Isn't that
and I'm
wild?
like, dude, if I have to ask my doctor, like, isn't he the one that's underqualified? Like, why
Exactly,
am
right.
I gonna prescribe something? Like, he should know, like I shouldn't have to ask him anything, and it's just amazing, like the level, or like just the fact that GMO exists and how harmful that is, and the fact that most countries ban it, and that it's okay here. But aside from like all of that, like when you have a massive enemy like that, really at the end of the day, if you have time to prepare, like, so how Sun Tzu said it, and I'm going to totally screw this quote up, but he said basically, like, if you're feeling fighting a bigger force than yourself, you can still be victorious, but you attack and you run away, and when you run away, you had traps preset. So like if I'm going to go, attack an encampment of 50 men and it's just me, like I might go over there, set some explosives, detonate them, throw some more, and then when I run back, I might have like, Vietnam pits with bamboo spikes in them, and
Punchy sticks in
yeah,
there.
so like I go as one man, and I end up taking out, half their encampment, because of the tactics that I use. So like, and like people are like, well, that's, you're going against the government, and I'm like, well, so didn't the Vietnamese. All they had was some
Yeah,
tunnels
the
and assault rifles, and so
that's actually that is something that Sun Tzu talks about. Sun Tzu. Sorry to all my Chinese fam out there. I'm going to butcher this, but uh, Sun Tzu, he does talk about different size forces and being victorious
mhm,
in situations where you're the underdog. I have read the Art of War a few times. It's an excellent book. It definitely has parables today that we can apply. Um, it definitely has lessons that it teaches that can be applied today.
yeah,
And
yeah,
they can be applied outside of combat. It doesn't have to be a rifle in your hand. It could
right,
be, strategic thinking when you're talking about an adversary, whether that adversary is red team, blue team,
hmm,
the feds, your
yeah,
boss at work, somebody you don't like, whatever.
yep.
Um, it's a great book, and it definitely has some great lessons.
And I think,
And I love that you reference it
yeah,
in your work.
I think that coming from that subculture of like IRC and hacking, and like, like my mentor was like, he's like around when modems, they were rated with bauds, he's there with BBCs and all this other shit. So like that's like that old school mentality of like, hey, like I don't get this. Well, RTFM, it's like
Yeah, right.
here's your first version of Linux, install it, and
What was your first computer?
I don't know. I got it for free from a downstairs neighbor. Yeah. I got it for free from a downstairs neighbor, and it was a
You were
piece.
using dial-up, I guess, though, right?
A piece of shit. It hardly run Morrowind. So I don't know. I guess that.
My first computer had DOS. There was no modem, so obviously no internet, uh, and that was about it.
Yep.
And, I upgraded to a something that had a 56K not long later, but yeah, man, that's a different world, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So like on my first install, I remember it was the first, like he was like my mentor. He's like, install this this version of Linux. And I was like, all right. He's like, make sure you set up the partitions. I was like, what's a partition?
What's a partition?
He's
Yeah.
like, so what he had actually handed me was Slackware. And at the time, there was no GUI install, you know? So it was like,
Yeah.
it was brutal. So like I see people nowadays like on Reddit and they're like, oh, don't install Kali if you're a noob. And I'm like, why?
Oh
Dude,
God.
install it in
Yeah.
a
Just a
VM.
distro,
You're
man.
gonna be fine,
Yeah.
bro. They got a GUI installer. You can't fuck this up. Like, and even if you do, it's a VM. Delete it and make another one. Like,
You don't even have to install Kali these days. They've got pre-built virtual machines for you to download. You can install VirtualBox
yeah,
or
yeah,
VMware and call it a day.
yep, yep.
Uh,
So I mean,
yeah, I have a
yeah, it's crazy, man. But like, so aside from like that, just really looking at every different facet of that, coming from like that infosec and security background, you kind of are already hardwired to look at it kind of as like a red team, blue team, or us versus them. Where going into like that kind of thing, where like if I was to grab you or a pen tester and be like, hey, listen, this is what we're doing. Like, you're going to be like, all right, well, these are the vulnerabilities we have. And you're already going to be in sync of like, you know, looking at the dangers that are going to exist from a cybersecurity standpoint. So like OPSEC is built into
right.
us by default, you know? And like to us, like, you know, good security isn't like a 6-character password on Windows 10, you know? Like
Don't even get me started on those fucking passwords.
so
Put your 4-digit pin in.
so like that's like it's a completely different way. So like when you're coming at it from that angle, it's no different from like if you're, you know, if you're blue teaming and you're like, listen, like you're fresh in and you're like, say you're the only guy, and they're like, listen, here's our budget, just make sure we don't get hacked, you know. Like you have a ton of options, but like you don't typically 9 times out of 10 you're not going to have multiple nation states targeting you. So it's like, well, it's different, and yeah, it is different. But at the end of the day, like an exploit ran is still an exploit ran. Like it's because it's the nation state running it. It doesn't make it any different. It just means they might have some 0 days you don't know about. So you know the remedy for that is camouflage and cover and be quiet. You know, like just keep a low profile as much as you can. So to answer your question about OPSEC with the home, which is a great question, by the way. So for that, my solution, I hear a lot of people on a lot of forums and stuff, and they're like, oh, use a VPN. That way, if Tor fails, and I'm like, listen, man, like I don't advise that. And like a lot of people dislike that I don't advise to use a VPN with Tor. You have to trust whatever company you're dealing with. And like at the end of the day, if you look at what is a company, like define it for me. Well, it's a profit-seeking entity. Okay, so a profit-seeking entity that puts profit or, you know, shareholders or profit margins above anything else, right? Which a lot of companies do. I'm not saying all do, but a good amount of them do. Someone who only cares about profit, regardless of like the social impact, the economic impacts, whatever, environmental impacts, I would define that person as a sociopath, right? You only care about one thing. And like, if I have to kill 30 people to get it, I don't care as long as I get it. Well, you got something wrong with you then. You know, you probably, so
There's a lot of people trusting some shady VPNs out there.
yes,
People, especially every time, I swear to God, every time somebody says, all you need is a VPN, there's a ton of free ones out there. A puppy dies somewhere.
it's like,
Like,
it's like,
somebody kills
dude,
a puppy every single
all
time
you
you
gotta
see
do,
that.
all you gotta do with that person is be like, no, you're right, man. Here, listen, see this Wi-Fi access point? It's open. It's totally safe. It's totally
Just go process your credit cards over
yeah,
it. It'll be
for
good.
sure, man. Yeah. Just go ahead, go use that real quick. You know, it's like
There are a lot of VPN companies out there, and I don't know off the top of my head which ones are safe and which ones aren't, so I'm not going to venture.
yeah.
I
So
have the ones that I use,
yep.
but
Yep. So
yeah,
so I like to say none of them
they're
are.
not free ones.
Well, yeah, and I like to say none of them are, and even the ones that are in countries that have no extradition, no, like they do not cooperate with the United States. People like to say, well, like there are countries that don't cooperate with the United States. I'm like, yeah, you're right. And at the end of the day, like a great example of a country like that, as far as like banking, used to be like the Swiss, right? There's infamous Swiss bank
Mhm.
accounts. Google it. Like they're not so secretive now, and a lot of information got out there about them. So like at the end of the day, people are like, oh, well, this VPN's a no log VPN. I'm like, oh yeah, that's cool. How do
Bullshit.
they figure out who their premium subscribers are? If how do
Exactly.
they know? Like it makes no sense whatsoever. But again, like, but just monitoring users. I mean, how do you monitor whose subscription has expired and whose hasn't? And you have to know when people are connecting, what accounts are connecting, all of those things. But aside from all that, so from an OPSEC standpoint, like if I have to blindly trust something, then that's not knowing something, it's having faith in something, right? Like there's a massive kind of difference between the two, in my opinion. um
I really like the trustless models.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
really
yeah, I
I
mean,
mean, that's why I think that's why I'm a huge crypto
yep,
fan is the no trust
yeah,
networks. I mean, even if we can agree that, even if we say that, Bitcoin and all the cryptocurrencies out there in today, the way they exist today are totally not going to exist in 10 years. I think that the future is trustless.
hmm
Some type of decentralized, trustless network where you can join it, you can transact, and you don't have to rely on some certificate authority or some third party to
yep.
validate, things are happening for
So
you.
I love the
Uh,
fact that on the dark net, if I'm dealing with someone, I can verify who this person is without actually knowing who this person is. Like
yes.
you can be on 15 different websites and then you hop up on a new one and you're like, oh, it's Mike. I'm like, prove it's Mike, and you write me a signed message. Hey Sam,
Right.
you asked me if this was Mike. This is Mike. And today's the 12th of whatever, and then that's an assigned message. I take that signed message, I run it with the public PGP key. All right, yeah, it's as far as I know. Again, nothing's foolproof in security. So that could absolutely be a Fed. I don't know. I
But public private key encryption is pretty good
Yeah. Well,
as
so
far as as far as
so
validating signatures and making sure that data is encrypted,
one thing that really
things like that. It
actually,
works pretty
I
well.
had, I had a friend who runs a channel. His name's C-Wade12C. And he actually, a couple of days ago, he put me on to um, some of the theoretical and actual vulnerabilities. And I haven't really gotten into it yet of it, but like, if I write a message that says like, hey Mike, how you doing, and then I write another message that says, hey Alex, how you doing, how like sometimes those messages will have similarities. And now the countermeasure for that, even like when they're encrypted, the countermeasure for that has kind of evolved, has been salt pack, which I know basically nothing about. So that's one of the things that like I want to definitely be diving into, because like issues with PGP would be that would be bad,
I feel like I feel like we're starting to run up against the wall with encryption. Did you see? It was like a week or so ago. The um, Biden administration announced that they were going to start uh, moving over to quantum encryption standards.
But you can't have it.
I mean, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. I was laughing the other day. I told my son, I call him Bitly. I told my son that I thought when quantum computing was available for everybody, that when we got to the point where you could rent a quantum computer, um, when that became available, or actually maybe even prior to that, maybe when because Google is projecting being able um, to be able to break encryption within the next 4 or 5 years, I believe, which is why they're taking this so serious. I was telling my son Bitly that I thought this was going to be on the same level of an emergency as like Y2K. I'm sure you remember Y2K
Yeah,
and all the nonsense that went along with
for
that,
sure.
like people making runs on stores and stuff. Imagine
It's
if
great for
every
consumerism. We do it every 10 years,
it's
The
true, we
Mayan
do.
calendar,
Yeah, imagine if the world found out that literally everything on the internet, and I mean that everything, cryptocurrency, every credit card transaction you make, the Tor network, every message that you've sent to your mistress,
Hmm.
everything was going to be able to be decrypted. And the reason I think this is a huge issue, not because I care about any of that, but because um, there's a lot of companies out there that have secure connections set up, and they're not going to take the time to fix
For
that.
sure.
They're not going to take the time to go back and update their encryption libraries.
Hmm.
Like it's going to be pandemonium for a while there. I'm interested to see how that's going to work out. But the reason I was laughing is because I told my son Bitley, who's 13, I said, I believe that it's going to be a big deal, just like Y2K was a big deal. And he said, he goes, Dad, what's Y2K? And I died a little bit inside. I was like, oh my God. um, all right. So I want to talk a little bit more about your store. And I want to read to you really quick
Hmm.
what I believe it was, what site was that? The Department of Justice?
Yeah, I swear to God, they have like
Yeah,
a
Justice.
script that they follow with any, excuse me, with any like any type of darknet bust that they have. They get so excited. Like I swear I could see like the USA about to shoot in his pants whenever they make an announcement about like, they're like, oh, they can't hide on the dark net, these criminals. And like so like the thing I love about that quote is like when I went to federal prison, right? Like I got there and like if you when I so the statistics change all the time because people are coming and going, but like when I looked up the statistics, it was like 73% of the people that were in federal prison were there for drugs, right? So like when I looked that up, I'm like, oh wow, at least I'm going to be there with my own kind, like right? Like
At least you'll have something to talk about.
yeah, like the majority isn't murderers and rapists, so that's cool. You know what I mean? So I was like, oh, that's good. So like when I went in there, and I remember talking to people and they were like, oh, like, what are you here for? And I was like, oh, I was a darknet vendor. And they're like, oh, what the fuck is that? 'Cause some of these guys, like, they've been in prison 30
They have no
years.
idea.
They don't know.
Yeah, they don't even know what the internet is.
So I'm like, so I finally get around
Like, what
to
the hell's email?
it's true. Yeah. So like I end up like finding out that like in that whole compound, I mean, there's a ton of drug traffickers and there's like some dudes who like work for El Chapo, like serious men. And you got like Italian dudes from New York who are totally not part of organized crime. But like you got like all these these different guys that were involved in it, and none of them were darknet vendors. So I'm like, okay, if I'm going statistically, now I can kind of understand why they get so excited when they bust one, because it's not something that's common. I mean, if you have 150,000 dudes who are in federal prison, and 72% of them are there for drugs, and a couple hundred are there because they're darknet vendors, then what does that say about low hanging fruit, law enforcement, and the difference between when I add encryption, I'm up, my apple tree is 10 stories up, as opposed to that guy who's selling on the corner, or the drug trafficker who's moving a lot, but he's doing it in real life. Like, so that's the separation that I saw with it.
So this was the first nationwide undercover operation targeting darknet vendors. The Department of Justice, U.S. Immigrations, Customs Enforcement, and Homeland Security, if I'm saying that, maybe there's supposed to be a comma there. Customs, Homeland Security Investigations, the U.S. Secret Service, and the U.S. Postal Inspection Service,
Hmm.
and the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, were all involved. There were 35 arrests, one of which you were.
Yep.
And they seized $23.6 million in assets.
Hmm.
And the Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein, I think is Rosenstein, um, he is quoted as saying, "Criminals who think they are safe on the darknet are wrong. We can expose their networks, and we are determined to bring them to justice." So that leads me to my next question. How did they get you? Where was the OPSEC failure?
Right, that's a great question. So,
If there was. If there was.
so, um, so all right. So to answer that, I kind of have to go back a little bit. So, my cousin was the one who had shipped out packages, and we had very strict, um, policies, security policies. So I had spent,
So you established policies
yeah,
ahead of time.
yeah.
You
So,
established
so,
okay,
so we did that. We
cool.
also spent probably close to 150 hours having conversations about like me setting it up so she understood her rights. So, like for example, a cop comes, knocks on your door, like you're at home. What do? 9 times out of 10, people open the door because like, oh, it's police, and a lot of people are like, well, I don't have anything to hide. And that's like such the wrong method.
That is the
But
number one tool.
um,
That's the number one tool. So, yeah, when I was a military police officer, that was one of the things that they taught us to use was this I guess it is social engineering.
yeah,
It's
for
social
sure.
engineering
Yeah.
against somebody you suspect.
Yep.
Hey, you don't mind if I take a look around your car, do you?
Hmm.
You're not hiding anything. I'm just
Right.
here. I'm just trying to do my job. I just want to go home.
Mhm.
It's the end of my shift. I got 20 minutes left. Just let me take a look and then we can get out of here and you can go on with your day kind
Yep.
of thing. Right.
Yep.
And then people go, oh crap. I know I've got, you know, 10 kilos of cocaine in the trunk. Maybe he won't look there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But, of course, that's how everybody gets busted.
Yep.
That's how a lot of them get busted.
Yeah.
They're giving
Yeah.
away your rights.
Yeah.
Always
Yep.
say no.
Yep. I mean, at the end of the
Always
day,
say no.
you have to consent to anything, including just a discussion.
Yeah.
So, like at the end of the day, if
If they're asking, then the answer should be no.
yeah, well, if you're law enforcement, we're not even going to get that far because you're going to come to my door, you're going to knock on my door, I'm going to go up to my door, I'm going to open the screen, I'm going to see you with law enforcement uniform on. And I'm gonna close my blind. I'm gonna walk away. If my door's not locked, I'm gonna lock it. I'm gonna walk away. And like it's like, what are you gonna do? You go, oh hey, we need to talk to you. All right, have your dispatcher call me. Because then when your
Right.
dispatcher calls, I just don't answer the fucking phone. It's my phone. I don't have an obligation to answer you. You're not my
Right.
master.
Because
I'm your
as
master.
you
I
know,
I pay your salary.
as you know, you know well that if they're coming to get if they want something, they're going to take it.
Right.
They're not going to be asking
If
questions.
yeah, if
They're
they
going to kick in the door
Right, yeah.
at that
So
point.
so if they have a right to ask you something, if they have a right to come in, exactly. They're not your friends. They're not gonna politely not. They're gonna kick the fucking door open. They're gonna come in.
Right.
But they didn't actually do that in my case, which is really considerate. But that's I'll get to that in a minute.
You didn't have to buy a new door.
Yeah, that was awesome. And I mean, usually they try to act like they're in Iraq, which so the fact that they didn't, because I'm a nonviolent drug offender, man. You know what I mean? If you're doing surveillance on me, you know who I
Right.
am. You know what I mean? So I appreciate that they actually acted, reasonably, for what
With restraint.
yeah, for what the situation dictated. Like I mean, I remember talking to a sheriff who was talking about how they preferred not to do raids like that. He's like, we'll just wait for you to leave your house, pull you over on the side of the road, detain you that way, and then secure the house so no one gets hurt. Like, why
So
not do
much
that?
safer to do it
You
that
know?
way.
And I'm like, dude, it's brilliant. That's how you should. But as a peace officer, that's how you should be thinking. Like, and that's
Yes.
yeah.
Peace. That's the key
So like
word
those
there.
those sheriffs, man, like to me, when I think of like a peace officer, I think of that guy in the Norman Rockwell painting who would help the kid who got lost. So that's kind of like as far as law enforcement goes. Like a lot of people are like, oh well, you were a darknet vendor, you must hate law enforcement. And I'm like, no, like there are rapists, there are murders. Like
There are
I've
plenty
met
of great police officers
I've
out there.
I've
It's the
met
ones that are
well, I'm not
doing the bad
I'm not
things.
even talking about the police. I'm talking about like there are a ton of criminals that I've met that are socio and psychopaths that, man, these guys, they had 10, 12 life sentences that like I wouldn't want to see them out of prison, because I can tell you for a fact if these
Sure.
guys got out tomorrow, they're killing 4 people, right off the bat, and they already know it. It's like there are definitely people who, need to be incarcerated, but you also have a ridiculous amount of people who I think don't need to be, or are needlessly incarcerated, and we send billions of dollars every year to keep them there. And like, we have 5% of the world's population with 25% of the world's prisoners. We incarcerate more people in this country than any country ever has in the history of the world. That is insane, and they say none are more hopelessly enslaved than those who believe they're free. And like, our criminal statistics kind of speak for themselves. I think it's like one out of every three or something like that, has some type of conviction. I mean, that's insane. Like,
It's
it's
wild.
like it's like back, in the 20s, knowing someone who had cancer was a rare thing. And it's like nowadays, not knowing someone who does, who had cancer or died from cancer is a rare thing. It's the total opposite. And it's I kind of think I feel like it's been switched around. And I know it's jumping around, but like, kind of answer what you were saying. Um, so my thing with my cousin, like what I told her and what I tell a lot of people when I'm telling them about their rights, is at the end of the day, listen, if I meet you and I say, hey man, it's great to meet you. My name's Sam. And you're like, oh, I'm Russell. I'm like, all right, cool, nice to meet you, man. So and I'm like, hey, listen, Russell, I just want to say, man, before we start talking, anything you say to me, I'm going to use against you. So, what do you want to talk about? You're gonna be like, dude, I'm good. I'm good. I don't have nothing to
That
say.
is the for
You know?
real dynamic between you and every police officer you're talking to that is on the job collecting information,
Right.
that they are building a case.
Right.
And if odds are they're building a case against you, or they're trying to,
Yep.
it's the truth. It's the truth.
So,
If the more friendly they are to you, the more likely they are trying to pump you for information. And I hate to say that, because
yeah.
there are, look, there are so many good people out there that want to be police officers to
Hmm.
help protect children and protect their communities, and
Sure.
get riffraff off the streets. There are so many good
There's a
people out
lot,
there. It's the
also a
ones.
lot of psychopaths, that just want to kill
Yeah,
someone, or just, they're bullies,
yeah,
and that's the big thing. And like, but as people, just, and so the reflection of that world and cybersecurity is exactly the same. Like, you have people who are power hungry, and you get like, you need to know how to defend yourself, whether we're talking in a cybersecurity context, or we're talking in a legal context. Like, if you're a criminal, your job is to be educated on how to evade your adversary. Like, if you don't know how to evade your adversary, you're an idiot. Like, you're gonna get. It's gonna be like, it's like going. It's like, I'm gonna drive 100 miles an hour into a brick wall and argue with you about what seat I'm gonna sit in. Like that's the idiocracy of it. So, like, taking a
yeah.
step back from that and saying, like, well, what do we know? Well, we know that there are laws, like federal laws, So, like, I think it's, off the top of my head, I want to say it's Title 18, Section 13, subsection 241, 242, which is federal law, and dictates, deprivation of constitutional rights, and it also dictates, color of law. So it's like, if you're law enforcement, what can you do? What can't you do? And like, one of the things in there, again, off the top of my head, it's not going to be 100%, but it's like, when two or more individuals conspire to deprive, another individual of any right that they have that's granted to them by the United States, that those people are guilty of deprivation of rights. And one of the wording in there is like intimidation. So, like, if you're law enforcement and you show up, and you're like, hey, and you talk to him like, hey, get off my property. And you're like, well, we just need to, like, no, listen, dude, you're armed, okay? Like, you're armed with a deadly weapon, and I feel intimidated. Get off my property. Well, we just need to, okay, this is aggravated now. Now it's a different level. This is a federal law you're breaking, dude. So, you know what I mean? Like, you want to play this game, you better know the law. Like, if you're law enforcement, you're like, I've talked to law enforcement. They're like, oh, you need to show me an ID. I'm like, what law? There are states that require it, but I'm like, what law? Cite the law, cite the statute. If you can do that, I'll look it up, and I'll provide you with that. I'm not driving a motor
We used
vehicle.
to carry around we used to carry around when I was working as a police officer, we would carry around a little book that had the state laws in it
Mhm.
and a little book that had the federal
That's
laws in it.
awesome.
Those were the only laws outside of UCMJ. Those were the only laws that I was required to
Yep.
enforce were state and federal. And yeah, we absolutely carried them
Mhm.
around with us because, uh, well, it I hate to say this, but to some extent, it was a fishing
Yeah.
expedition. It
Yeah,
was you'd pull
absolutely.
somebody
Yeah.
over and you'd say, "Okay, what laws can I apply to this thing?"
Right.
Which is horrible, and it's so embarrassing to say that, but
No,
I
it's
want
what
to
it
be
is.
honest.
So,
That's
but that's
that's what it
and
is.
that's what I'm defending against. So, like at the end of the day, like when you come at me and you say, "Well, like you have to produce identification," I say, "Okay, sure. What's the law?" And you go, it's like at the end of the day, you saying, "Well, I have this contract." And you have to do what I say because of this wording right here. And I'm like, okay, cool. What's that word mean? And you go, I don't know. Like what
A lot of police
what just
have
happened to
a
your
loose
authority?
grasp
Like,
a lot of police have a loose grasp on what the law is, and the majority of what they know gets them through because the majority of what they know they can loosely apply, and they're
well,
correct.
it's
But
also
the problem is the problem is that when you're loosely applying laws to somebody that can end up in them being convicted for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
you know,
10 years, whatever.
yeah.
I mean, it's a big deal.
Mhm.
You are messing with somebody's life, and um those police are they're not held accountable when they get it wrong.
Mhm.
A lot of times they're just not. It's like, oh, I made a mistake. It's an on the job mistake.
Yeah.
Maybe they get corrective training or whatever from their direct line supervisor, but that's the extent of it for them. Meanwhile, you just spent 2 3 years in prison because you were wrongfully convicted of something.
Yeah.
It's that's one of the big reasons I had to get out of that line of work. When I got out of the military, um, I couldn't bring myself to go into police work. It wasn't for me anymore. I had my biggest concern was that I'm a combat veteran
Mhm.
and I have PTSD, and I wholeheartedly believe to the to the bottom atom in my body that if you have combat experience, you should not be a police officer.
Mhm.
I know that's going to rub a lot of my brothers the wrong way out there, but listen, you cannot turn it off.
Mhm.
I know you think you can turn it off, but you can't turn it off. Okay. We are taught in the military um, to increase our level of force until we are in control of the situation. And it just, I don't know. It
It's
just,
because
a lot of times
you're
it,
not policing though. Like if you're in another country,
right. It's a different
it's a
story.
it's a totally different thing. Police they're not supposed to be gearing up to go kill people. Like they're supposed to be keeping the
Right.
peace. They're not.
But
They're
when you're,
diametrically opposed to each other. One keeps the peace. One they're soldiers, man. What do you do as a soldier?
right,
It's not keeping the peace.
right.
I mean, it might be if like
It,
if you're in psyops or something. You're trying to avoid having 1,000 people die by using propaganda. But like at the end of the day, it's a diametrically different thing. And really, at the end of the day, I think the end user, meaning the American, is the one who's at the end of the day the one who's responsible for being able to defend themselves, just like your security at home is on you. I mean, if you never update your router firmware, everything has default passwords, and you get owned, you can't be pissed off at Netgear. Like you
yeah,
didn't do what you should have done. And like people who get owned by the law, I mean, a lot of those cases, not all of them, but a lot of those cases are people who just simply don't know their rights. Let us search, or you're what are you hiding something? Like, man, let me search your car, officer. Oh, you don't want to do that. Oh, I paid for it. My salary paid for your car. You know what I mean? So like if anyone is entitled to something, I'm entitled to it. So like at the end of the day, like, and it's like I'm required to produce in Vermont. I'm not required to produce ID upon request, but like as law enforcement, you are. You are. That's why you have business cards. That's why you have a badge number. Like,
right.
that's why those things exist for accountability. Because you are given the authority to act for the state, and that's exactly what color of law is. So when you screw up, because you're supposed to be enforcing the laws, you're supposed to know them, and when you screw up, the punishment should be more severe for you. But it's never going to be if you're dealing.
It's always
But
one-sided.
it's never going to be if you're dealing with citizens who don't understand how to defend themselves, what their own rights are. What's the difference between a right and a privilege?
Or
Like
or they believe that you're going to be honest with them. If they pull you over and they say, "Hey, I want you to do X, Y, or Z," and you say, "Well, what are my rights here?"
Mhm.
They're not gonna tell
Right.
you,
They have no,
right?
they have
They're
no,
just
they
not
have, yeah, they have no legal obligation to give you legal advice. And
they're gonna say, "Call your lawyer."
right, exactly. If you're lucky, they might just
Yeah, if
lie to
you're
you,
lucky, they'll say that.
and
Yeah, or they could just absolutely blatantly lie to
yeah,
you.
or
Yeah.
like if they see that you're that susceptible to intimidation, they might be like, "Listen, motherfucker, we'll take your kids." Well, like it's
Yeah.
that's what it is, man. And like that's kind of what you're dealing with. It's like the nurse who is completely desensitized to people going through pain, so she just jabs you with a needle. And like you have cops who are just completely desensitized to any semblance of. I mean, the system is kind of built like that, where everything is kind of compartmentalized. So like once that cop kind of hands off his case, he doesn't see that guy again. That guy goes to jail or prison, and he doesn't have to deal with all the outfall from it. And like the next person deals with that, whether it's like the prosecutor or the prison system. Like so you have this kind of compartmentalization where the effects aren't really seen. But you do have police. Probably one of my favorite police was a guy, I forget his name, but he made a DVD called Never Get Rated. It's great DVD. If like you're looking at OPSEC countermeasures for law enforcement, like he goes off and he was one of the highest, he had one of the most highest narcotics convictions when he was law enforcement. And he was like, I destroyed so many families that I quit, and he started making these DVDs that taught people how to do it securely. And like obviously I do my research, due diligence, right? I had researched this guy, found him, and like I would watch him, and he would talk about watching cars in lanes, and like how he would see one switch and then another, and like maybe they're out of state plates or they're rental cars, and he's like, this is a lead, this is a follow, these are drug mules. And like this is he's like, I drive up behind you and you have like support the cops decals. He was like, I immediately don't trust you. Who wants to support us? But it's brilliant, like that level of kind of detail that he provides. So different resources like that level of being eclectic as far as taking in information and analyzing, aside from cases. You also have stuff like that, like those ex-police who are like, listen, I think that a guy growing weed in his basement, us going in there with MP5s and accidentally shooting the 5-year-old, which is a true story, is totally unnecessary because there's a nonviolent drug crime, and this guy is going to prison for 30 years, and for what? For cannabis, and like that's at the end of the day, though, that's the big thing. It's like I've said a million times, like at the end of the day, drugs used to be completely legal in the 1920s. Be like, oh, you want to legalize coke and heroin? I'm like, dude, they did it in Oregon, and we had it like that before. When you make something illegal and you ban it, you make it profitable. You take away that
Yeah.
profit incentive and you legalize it, it's people are going to be like, who cares? Like it's, how hard it is to sell weed in California now, like illegally, unless it's like you're doing it to avoid the taxes. Like again, like they legalize it and they get so greedy, they want every penny, and they shoot themselves in the foot by doing this kind of asinine stuff. It's like here in Vermont, they're like, oh, it's legal, but you can only grow 6 plants. And I'm like, okay, well, if growing tomatoes are legal, I don't have a limit on that. Why do I have a limit on this?
So were you actually manufacturing your own and if this crosses lines of what you can talk about legally, I
Mhm.
understand, but were you manufacturing your own products to sell on the dark net?
So
How I think we left off with where your OPSEC failure was.
mhm.
So I'm really
Yeah,
curious
yeah.
what had
Let's
happened.
go back to that. So how I had set it up with shipping was when we shipped out packages, we would ship 3 packages per post office. So we like you have a ton of stuff that the United States Postal Service uses as red flags. So first off, I discounted the idea of like DHL, UPS, because all of those are private services, and because they're private services, they can open whatever package they want whenever they want, and that's horrible. So with the United States Postal Service, they require a warrant because it's the federal government. So they require a warrant to open that. And like as law enforcement, you know that, what do you need for a warrant? We need reasonable suspicion coupled with probable cause. Then you can apply with oath or affidavit to a judge and, see if he grants you said warrant. Um, so like that's required. So if you know all that and you know what their red flags are, like too much tape, a box that is not a USPS box, a fake return address, a fake to address, if you know all those things, you can have countermeasures where it's never going to qualify as even reasonable suspicion to law enforcement, which a United States postal inspector is a federal agent. He's a cop. So like a lot of people think of him like oh, it's just a postal worker. Like no, dude's a cop. So he's a fed. So if I know everything he's looking for, I can counter that and never have it qualify as that. So like for like the two addresses, like if you give me a fake name and your package doesn't arrive, you're hit. That's on you. That's in my terms of service as a darknet vendor. Now, to make it so that the return address I'm shipping out from is never flagged, I needed legitimate return addresses, and they had to be real people. But like I'm trying to make it so that my kids can live in a halfway decent place. That's why I'm doing this. It's not to buy a Lexus, it's to survive, man. Because it's hard, nowadays too. So that's what I'm fighting. It's definitely the wrong fight, but side issue. So going forward, I'm like, all right, well, if I do this, I don't want to send out, 5 ounces of coke from Russell, who's got a family, he's got kids, he's a hardworking guy, ex-vet, right? Like honorable dude, right?
I wouldn't say all that, but
Well, so from what I know about you, right?
I appreciate it.
Maybe I should conduct better OSINT before I do this podcast. I'm kidding.
Yeah, you mentioned in your DEF CON talk, you were using sex offender. You use the sex offender registry?
Right, because at the end of the day, like those are the people that I knew, like the universal karma of them getting raided by the feds. Who cares? Like no one cares. You know what I mean? It's like
Right.
it's like if a gang member gets killed, aside from that gang member's family, no one's crying. You know what I mean? No one cares. Unfortunately, that's just a sad reality of the world we live in. There are people who are seen as just not as valuable as others. That's
So where did it fall apart then?
so what happened was
Because it sounds like you had a pretty good operation in
yeah.
place. I
So
mean, I think that's a lot further than a lot of people
yeah.
would.
So the for every post office, we would only visit it once every 6 months, and we would only ship out 3 packages. So, and it's from a legitimate return address. We've knows there because it's required by law for it to be a legitimate address. So where that got screwed up. So I like to say initially when I first got busted, I thought like I was like, I didn't screw up, my cousin did. Like she's screwed up. That's why we're in this situation. And then like I kind of step back and it's like if you own a company and something goes wrong, there's like if you are the owner of the company, there's no pass in the buck, right? Like you could try,
Yeah.
but it's just not true, man.
At the end of the day, it's you.
It's you. So, like at the end of the day, it was me. I was doing so many different things and juggling so many things that supervising her was something that I didn't actively do that I should have been more proactive in. Had I been supervising her, I would have noticed that she was mailing out sometimes 15, 20 packages at one post office.
Oh,
And it's like, well, who cares about that? Well, remember what I said. Every 3 packages so is one address, right? So for every 3, it's a different address. So like let's say I hand you if you're her, I hand you 9 packages. Okay. Those 9 packages have 3 different return addresses, spread out through all of them. Now, how she knows where to ship these boxes out is based on the return address. So this kind of delegates her route, but it gives her the freedom to be able to choose her own route, which also
Mhm.
creates a little bit less predictability, right? So by me
Yeah. Humans create patterns.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
So by me
Yeah.
choosing the post offices and keeping track of them, and then letting her determine the route, that's how I saw it. It gives it a little bit of entropy.
Sure.
Entropy maybe is the right word.
Yeah.
Um, so that's how we did it. So what she would do though is, so in exchange for that, she would get like a flat rate of, like, it was like $5 per package, but then it was also, aside from the flat rate, it was a standard flat fee of like 10% of whatever the profit was from each package.
Nice.
Then it was like she got a gas card, so like she would never have to buy gas. Her bill, like her car payments, her insurance, all her stuff was paid. Unlimited drugs of whatever she wants. Which she wasn't like into hardcore drugs,
Wow.
but
Talk about
she would
benefits.
have like so we had a comprehensive benefits package.
Yeah.
Didn't include
Comprehensive benefits
didn't
package,
include a
man.
401k, but like
Unlimited PTO,
um
stock
so
options.
like it was really good. There was really good compensation. She didn't have to pay to live where she lived because she lived with me. So like she didn't have any bills, and she made a good amount of money. So like my hope was that that good compensation would overcome for it, and I used the same kind of tactic when I would deal. So if I wanted to cash out, and I didn't want to do it in a specific way, I could go out, I could buy like 10 pounds of weed or a bunch of coke, and I could use a local dealer that like I knew, and I'd known for years, and I would just hand this off to him, and he would move it, and I would cuff it to him wholesale. So like I might charge him, say 1,600 a pound, which is going to be
So you were reselling locally then.
well. So
So you were
so I
buying on
would
the
I
dark
would I
net.
would wholesale on credit to one person who would distribute locally,
Ah, okay.
only if I wanted to
I thought it was the other way.
only if I wanted to cash out, and it was the other way. Yeah,
Ah.
yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Got it,
So
got it,
it
got
was
it. Okay.
that
So
was just a cash out method for me that I could use that didn't require me to pay a percentage, but instead netted me a profit.
interesting.
And it made it, and
So
it
when
killed the trail. So I'm not selling my shit on local bitcoins. How are you going to trace 20 pounds of weed that came to me through the mail that I got rid of for cash? Like, good luck.
right. Yeah. So when the knock came,
Mhm.
uh can you walk me through that?
Yeah, so
What
so
was that
so the
like?
knock came because she ended up bringing all those packages to the post office, and when she did, what they ended up doing was they're like, "Oh, this is really suspicious," and they cut one open. No warrant.
Oh,
No warrant.
right in front of her?
No, 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 no. They cut it open like beside that. Yeah.
Oh,
So they cut it open like besides that. So I've been going through the discuss.
how did they get away
So
cutting it open with no
so
warrant?
what they did was the Department of Homeland Security had sent emails out to the federal post offices around here. And I said, listen, if you see a female matching this description, take note of it and let us know. And that's how they did their surveillance. Um, yeah,
Interesting.
so it was really passive surveillance. I got to give them credit for that. That was great. That was really smart. How do you track?
Yeah, that's low key.
Yeah, man. So I was like, I
Wow.
saw a talk by Agent X on surveillance, on like passive forms of surveillance, and like this was the only type of surveillance I've ever heard of that was even less intrusive than like those kind of drop offs and follows where you have like 6 cars that just kind of rotate, coming to and fro with the target, so the target
Yeah.
never gets wise to it. Um, but yeah, so her coming back, like obviously at one point they follow her back to the house, they see where she lives. So
So then they made your location at that
right,
point.
so then well they made her location. So then when they cut the package open, they found coke. Then they used that coke to apply for a federal search warrant for the house, and that's how it happened. So now me and my cousin had an agreement of if the day ever happens where we get that knock, I'm responsible for security. So if something happens, it's my fault that it happened. And because it's my fault that it happened, my agreement was I take the hit for it. I admit. And that's so now after telling you like about my rights and all that stuff, like it's pretty obvious. I know what I'm talking about, and educating her for that length of period. Like I knew saying something is the worst thing you can do. The only thing you should say is
Yeah.
lawyer, like,
Yeah, of course.
so, but with that said, like, I knew that at the end of the day, how the feds are is they'll charge everyone. You know what I mean? So I didn't,
Oh yeah, of course they
if I
are.
can,
They're not going to let
right.
anybody just like skate away
So,
because that'll end up being the
yep.
mastermind
So I'm like,
that they let go.
if I can do damage control, that's a contingency plan that we had in place. So I was like, listen, if we do get raided, I will eat that. Like I'll be like, listen, everything's mine. You know what I mean? I'm a darknet vendor, and that's what it is. And like by doing that, it definitely diverts all the attention,
Um, I really like the fact that you're, an advocate for the people that can't help
Yeah.
themselves. That's I have been I have lots of friends that were, well, let me say this. I definitely have I have an acquaintance that is a victim of the system, and I definitely don't like for-profit prisons.
Yeah.
I think the for-profit prison system is a huge disservice to our nation.
Well,
So I wanted to
even the prisons that aren't
cover that with
even
you.
the prisons that aren't for profit, the Federal Register, the BOP is quoted as receiving $125 per inmate per day in the federal system, and that excludes any medical issues that they have. So, like, right off the bat, like you're getting used clothes, and in like a minimum security camp, there might be one CO for 500 people. So how the hell are you spending $125 a day on them? And then like if you look up the food, like Google expired cow hearts, Bureau of Prisons, and you'll see like it's something like 75 million pounds of expired cow hearts. Where the fuck do you find 75 million pounds of expired cow hearts? All right, I digress.
That's crazy.
But they took these 75 million pounds of expired cow hearts and sold them as ground beef to the BOP, who has no food safety standards. The FDA doesn't matter to the BOP. It's a federal agency.
Yeah, they don't care.
So there's no food standards. So like they get it in, they serve all these expired cow hearts. And then, I mean, they indicted like 2 guys later on for the fraud. But like my point is there's no food standards. Like if you're in a federal prison and you look at the boxes the food comes in, on the boxes, it says not for human consumption.
Jesus.
Horrible, man. Horrible. So
okay, I want to talk to you about the prison stuff too,
Yeah.
but first let's talk about how you got there.
Yeah,
so
so-
they knock on your door.
Yep. So 7:00 in the morning. And there's a knock on the door. So where I live, it's super rural, and like there's a lot of like nice houses, like mansions, that are on this road. It's a very wealthy, old money kind of road, which I just lucked out being able to rent a house there. But like that's the kind of setup it is. So I didn't, knock on the door, and the only people that ever come to this house that have ever been to this house, 3.5 years that I've been there, are Jehovah's Witnesses. And like they come there, and I gotta admit, like I enjoy the intellectual stimulation and a little bit of trolling. I just kind of talk.
They're just as determined as the feds too.
I just kind of talk shit about John Smith, and I'm like, listen, like if your holy book says only 175,000 people can go to heaven, like how do you classify if that's all the people in history? Like that's a very selective group. That means you're going to hell with me. Like why are you knocking on my door to begin with? So like and it was just, it's all, no disrespect. It was all kind of in good, I was humorous anyways. But so that's who I'm like, damn, 7. I'm like, so I have my coffee. I'm just taking my first few sips. I'm like, man, it's way too early. Like, this is not okay, So like I had opened up my laptop, started it up, got my coffee. I'm still half asleep. Got my coffee, went to the door. I open the door and I look out and I see like I see this guy standing in front of me, and then like in my peripheral vision, I see like that kind of like half raincoat, half jacket. And I'm like staring at this dude, and I'm trying to place him. Like, do I know this guy? And then like I see this,
Just trying to process what's
yeah. So
happening.
then I see like this bright yellow sewn badge, and onto his chest. I'm like, damn, this dude's chest is like out to here. And I'm like, oh, that's not a shirt, it's a bulletproof vest. And it's like it says DHS right here. And I'm like,
Oh my
and so I look
gosh.
back up at him, and he's like, hi, my name is, and I won't put him out there like that because he was decent about it. But he's like, hi, my name is whatever, and he's like, I'm a special agent with the Department of Homeland Security. And I was like, oh, all right. And like I look like this, and I see there's like 15 or 20
Just a
people
line.
behind him. Yeah, a bunch of dudes with
Yeah.
MP5s, you know,
They're all stacked
and
up,
this is,
ready to go,
yeah. So
man.
and this is before COVID. So like seeing people with ski masks with skulls on them is really weird.
Yeah.
You know, it's like all these dudes in paramilitary gear and MP5s, and so I look over and I see him, I see them, I look back at him, and I'm like, all right, man, I guess you want to come in then, huh? And he's like, yeah, that'd be good. I was like, all right. So like I step back, and like he comes in. Um and like after he comes in, it like dawns on me, like these dudes, like I don't know how reactionary or jacked up they are. So for me, I wanted to de-escalate if I could. So my form of de-escalation was saying, as the other dudes behind him started coming in, I was like, listen, man, I'm the only adult male here. My cousin, my female cousin, is right there, and my ex-girlfriend's right there, and there are 3 children in the living room. You know what I mean? Because I
Sure.
didn't want
Yeah.
them going in like,
That's good info.
oh,
Yeah.
um, so that was the big thing to me. Like my whole thing is, it's always been, I definitely did the wrong thing, but it was always been, my goal had always been providing for my family. I definitely went about it the wrong
Sure.
way. Lesson learned, man. But so that's how that went. Then so after that they came in, and again, like I said I was going to do something, so I like to keep my word. And that's why, like, I apologized the other day when I had the wrong day scheduled for
Oh no.
you. For you, you were like, "Don't worry about it." I was like, "No, this is a big thing, man. This is a big thing." Like, so, but you see, it's just even the little things, man, because it's important to me.
Yeah.
We have very little stock nowadays, and being a real person, it's just,
Being able to keep your word is a big
yeah,
deal.
man. It's like that should be.
I'm actually the same way.
Yep.
I Being able to keep your word is a big deal. Whenever I hire contractors or whatever to work on something, I'm always the quickest person to pay them, to take care of them,
Yep.
to make sure I'm where I say I'm going to be when I'm going to be there. I obviously don't get that same respect from people,
Right.
but it's all good. It is what it is.
But you know who
But
you are.
okay,
Yeah. And like, so
yeah,
then at the end of the day,
you
so
know,
like after they came in, I was like, listen, man, I'm a darknet vendor. All the drugs are mine. And they were like, what's the combo to the safe upstairs? What am I gonna do? Make you guys drill through it? I destroy a perfectly good safe. As Barksdale
yeah.
said in The Wire. So like, yeah. So yeah, they pop in. They're like, oh, is this heroin? And it's like, it's a bunch of hash. So like, as a darknet vendor, so my shipping methods were courteous as I could be to the civilians, I'll call them, that I might have to interact with, or the people that like my shipping method for using sex offenders, for instance. And for me, ethically selling, like, I would never say someone's messed up for what they do because it's none of my business. But like for me personally, like I never sold meth, fentanyl, heroin, like the stuff like that. So like I think the hardest thing I sold, honestly, the hardest thing I probably sold was moonshine. Because moonshine, like alcohol, is super addictive. It's, you can die from it. But like the worst illegal drug that I sold next to that was powder cocaine. But I only sold that for about a month, and that was because like my ROI just wasn't where I wanted it to be, and I thought I could try selling that to increase it. And yeah, I was getting tired of doing it. I wanted to wrap it up and be done with it, because as you know, and as Sun Tzu said, the longer a military campaign goes for, the more costly and ineffective it is. So I wanted it to be like a blitzkrieg and be in and out. And I just,
Didn't work out that
it's a
way. How
business.
long from start to end was it?
I don't know exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
That's never been a question that I actually could answer. The only thing I can answer is like, I started on Hansa. If you've been paying attention to like the darknet markets, then it probably gives you some relative idea. That was my first
Okay.
one.
All right, interesting. So they've knocked on your door,
Mm-hmm.
they got your stuff,
Yep.
you've taken credit for
Yep.
it. They probably haul you off. I'm assuming they didn't leave you there. They probably hauled you off to
They
jail.
didn't know who I was. So they knew that
Okay.
I lived there, but they didn't know that I had anything to do with it. Because at the end of the day, my
Okay.
OPSEC was, that's what my OPSEC was. It was that set, and I had my OPSEC, but then I also had my cover. And the distinction between the two, for like those who don't know, is OPSEC doesn't deal in deception most of the time. That's a separate part. Like cover would be, that's where you would employ your deception. Would be in your cover. And in my cover, like in my DEF CON talk, one of the things you see is a summary by the Department of Homeland Security who is asking about me to the post office that's right down the street. And they're like, oh yeah, he's the computer guy. He's the guy that he owns a computer business. Like that's an example of good cover. And the fact that my adversary wasn't able to gain any information from the people who had control for my mail shows that my OPSEC was very on point, you know? So at the end of the day, it wasn't my OPSEC that was screwed up. It was my supervision of my employee that was screwed up. My OPSEC and like the actual, if the transcripts from my sentencing, from my change of plea agreement, the United States attorney says like he had near perfect OPSEC. Like had his cousin not done what she had done, we never would have got him. He says like it's considerably harder to catch. And I love this because the U.S. attorney said, he's like, it's considerably harder to catch the darknet vendors who, you know, practice on tour because they're virtual and they don't have like, they have encryption. They have all these kind of different things that protect them. Whereas like regular dealers don't have that. And I always thought how it was funny. He says that to the judge, but then in front of the cameras, they talk about like they act like they're 10 feet tall and they can't hide behind Tor. You know, so like when I first got indicted, like I remember my lawyer telling me, she was like, oh, like they want to charge you with money laundering because how you sold Bitcoin to this other darknet entity called gold. That's where dark gold comes from.
Okay.
It was a guy, so it was an actual guy who did a cash out service for over 7 years. He's out of New York, and he did this cash out service where you send him Bitcoin, he sends you cash in the mail. Now, if you're someone who lives in reality, you know that at the end of the day, private sales of crypto are legal. Okay. But if you're a Fed, then you say, oh, look, he's selling crypto. It must be illegal. And like his justification for the money laundering was he was like, well, you pay 10%. I'm like, dude, do you know how much Bitcoin ATMs cost? Like, are you retarded? Like, are you?
There's like a 200% markup on them.
So I was like, I mean, that blew my mind. But like when I was talking to my lawyer, she's like, yeah, like, I mean, this is back in I think 2017 or something like that. And she was like, yeah, like he's not at all familiar with Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, like. And I was like, great, that's awesome. That's awesome that he doesn't know anything about it. Like at the end of the day, I'm like, listen, we need to capitalize on this. You know, this is like our enemy doesn't know anything of like we can, you know, make a very good defense if he's completely unaware of the situation. I was like, listen, you need to contact the EFF, okay, and have them come in on this so they can tell you. She's like, I'm not contacting any outside sources that I don't know. I was like, oh my God, lady. Like
the EFF is definitely who you want in your corner.
But she was a really good lawyer at the end of the day. So what happened was like moving forward from that, I had gotten throughout, like, so they hadn't arrested me because, again, they didn't know who I was. They knew I lived there, but they didn't
Interesting.
know I was doing anything illegal.
So did they take your cousin then?
No, nope, they didn't. So
They didn't take
all they
anybody.
didn't have
They
arrest.
just took your
So
shit?
they didn't have arrest warrants. They had search warrants.
Oh, interesting.
Yep.
Okay. But
So
then obviously they came back and got you at some
so
point.
no, they tried, but they failed because I wasn't there anymore. So what had happened was,
How did you end up in prison then?
yeah. So what?
How did this all end up
Yeah.
working out?
So what ended up happening was, after that, like, I had moved out. I moved out of the house. I ended up going to a shitty ass apartment. In a area of Vermont that's a good amount of crime for Vermont. For someone from southeastern Mass, it's nothing. Like, a bad area in Vermont is like a great area in southeastern Mass. So like, I had moved to this other apartment, and what happened was I had a arraignment date, right? So on the day of my arraignment, like, I went to court. The federal court from me is about an hour and a half to 2 hours away. So I had left early. So I went there. I had since then, I had gotten with a new woman who's now my wife, who's an amazing person. But
Congratulations.
thank you on that. But definitely one of the strongest people I've met, and one of the most positive influences in my life. So my cousin, and my wife had left from our apartment because my cousin's still living with me, and we had went to the courthouse. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but the feds showed up at the old place. And they're like, "Where's Sam Bent? We have an arrest warrant." And
Oh, wow.
my ex was like, "I don't know." So what they wanted to do is they wanted to be the ones to bring me in cuffs. But I beat them to it. I was at the federal courthouse with my lawyer, and
So you surrendered.
on the day of my arraignment, I walked up to the U.S. Marshal's office with my lawyer and self-surrendered to the U.S. Marshals, which looked great. And then
Yeah, I'm sure it did.
yeah, so then I'm in the holding tanks in the federal holding, area, and in the federal court, and I'm sitting there and I'm waiting. Now I've caught state cases and county cases, for drugs, cannabis, stuff like that, when I was way younger. So I kind of understand how things work. Like, when they had raided, I had lived up to my end, in taking the heat for everything I said I would. And like, they were going through the house, and like, they were discovering different stuff. So, like, they had found like hash and ecstasy and weed, and I don't know if they found coke. I think they did. I don't know. They found a bunch of stuff. I was like Walmart. I had a little bit of everything. But
Did you have weapons in there?
yeah. So I had
Well, I guess that's a dumb question. You had a big piece of land. I mean, of course you could have had weapons. Maybe it was for hunting or something.
well, so I was so I had 5 warrants at a mass that I had for 15 years.
Oh, wow. So they
Um,
wanted you.
So, well, they didn't even know,
Oh.
yeah. So, it turns out they really weren't that bright. Like I said, so they weren't there for me. They were actually there for her because they knew
Right,
about
because
her.
they were the one they trailed her back.
Right, and they had looked me up, right? Like, they had done that investigation. Like, in my DEF CON talk, I put up a slide where it shows, like, them interviewing my post office master, and the master being like, "Yeah, that guy runs a computer business." You know what I mean? So they were there for for her,
Yeah.
because she had screwed up and gotten lazy and complacent. But like, when they had went through the house, like, they really didn't know anything. Like, I had these petri dishes with agar in them, which is a substance that you can use to grow mycelium, which is the precursor to a mushroom. So when you
Magic
want to,
mushrooms, right?
yeah. Well,
Ah,
any
yeah.
kind of mushroom, but yeah,
Oh, any kind.
specifically, that's what
Any
I was
kind.
using it for. So, so like, you would take a piece of mycelium, or a mushroom spore, and you put it in this agar on a petri dish, and it would grow out like a spot of mold. It
And
would grow out.
And agar is algae, right?
Yeah, yeah. So it
Yeah.
looks it's like the consistency of Jello, but it's kind of yellowish. So like it would grow on there, and then like the spot that you see that's growing out the fastest, you can cut, put into a different petri dish, and by doing that, you can refine that kind of strain until you get to a point where you have super hyper aggressive growth, which then you can take and put into production. So you know when you actually go to grow these, they're going to grow the quickest and be the strongest. That you can get. And like the cop who had found them, they're in a big sealed clear tote inside of plastic wrap with the all the petri dishes because
You
when
seem
you
to know a lot
practice,
about this. What
yeah.
is?
So I'm a
Do you have a
mycologist,
background in
so,
this?
so I'm a mycologist. So I studied mycology. I studied botany. Botany was probably the longest. I studied that for like probably about 15 years.
Wow, that's
Um,
crazy.
yeah, so it was a lot of repetition because like my comprehension kind of sucks. So I read the
Do you
same
know anything about
paragraph.
CRISPR? It's for genetic editing or something. Like it's supposed to be this device that you can use in like your kitchen. If you look this up on YouTube, they got these people using this thing in their kitchen to make like glowing beer and like all
No
types of
shit.
stuff. Yeah, it's crazy. I was just wondering if you had heard of it because I was thinking it'd be cool if you could like make your mushrooms glow. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that's a thing or not, but I mean, you want to talk about a trip?
Yeah, so no, nah. It's already a ton of work. I mean, just
Yeah.
like learning about sterile technique and keeping everything sterile is extremely difficult to do when you're not in a laboratory environment.
Oh yeah, I
And you
imagine.
don't have HEPA filters and all this other craziness. Um, so like yeah, like just building a laminar flow hood to be able to practice mycology is relatively difficult. You definitely make a ghetto one. Anyway, side issue. So like the cop had found like one of the cops had found like this petri dish. I think he was a state cop because there's mostly feds there from Department of Homeland Security, but I want to say there was two staties, and he was like, "Oh, this is illegal," and I was like, "Dude, it's mycelium. There's no psilocybin in it, which means psilocybin is the thing that makes hallucinogenic mushrooms illegal.
Yeah,
That's what
and
makes you
that's
trip."
legal in some states for medical use, right?
Right. Yeah, and it's also legal
I think
on
they treat
most.
depression and PTSD and things like that with it.
Yep. You can also, I mean, another thing is like cluster headaches. You can microdose and basically totally alleviate cluster headaches. The other
Wow.
thing that magic mushrooms are really good for is opioid withdrawal. Like you can have people who microdose on magic mushrooms to get off of things like heroin instead of some of the alternates that exist like methadone where they're stuck on that for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
But again, that's not like a profitable thing. Like we don't, the any company is not going to want to give you a cure. They're going to want to give you a treatment because that's something that can continually line their pockets. It's a much better medical model, profit wise, than giving someone something that can take care of it completely. So, but aside from that, you have like a lot of Indian reservations. It's also legal there.
Interesting.
Right. So like with that, I was like, dude, it has no mycelium in it. Like it's not, there's no hallucinogen. It's totally legal.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, whatever. And he like walked away and he's like, came back like 10 minutes later and he's like, it's dangerous for people to breathe it in. And it's like sealed inside of 3 or 4 different. And I'm like, oh my God, man. So like, this is kind of like everyone thinks of the feds and they think of like, you know, CSI. And it's like, oh, they know everything. And like, we see like Snowden come out and he's like, hey, listen, they're watching everything. They know everything, been recording everything since like the 70s at least.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, but they're idiots. And I'm not saying all of them are. You got tons of brilliant people who, work in the federal government.
The knowledge
Especially
just isn't
like,
distributed evenly. It's just
right,
not.
right.
I mean, it's not that they're not. Most of them are intelligent people. It's just that like they either haven't taken the time to learn the things they're trying to enforce, or they are trying to enforce things that they really don't have a specialty in. For
Yeah. So
example,
I
like
mean,
drugs like that.
a lot of the people that I met, like the DS, I mean, the agents that were there, they were polite. Like that's one thing I'll give them. They
Yeah.
were definitely polite. They were respectful. Um, but like not too bright. And like, I mean, I remember like they were like, it was like 14 degrees outside because it's, Vermont. It's, I think, I don't know. I think it was April. Um, but it was like 14 degrees outside, and like they had searched the whole house, and they're like, "Is there anything in the garage?" And I was like, "No." And they're like, "Oh, all right." Like they just didn't want to go outside in the cold
Yeah.
because like a 2-car garage. So
You
they
could have
just
had
said
bodies out there.
they just said like fuck it. So I was like, yeah, that's cool, man. Because there totally wasn't slabs of used mycelium, substrate that had already grown mushrooms.
Oh
Um,
my god.
that wasn't out there at all. So that was awesome that they didn't go out there. But it was just yeah. So like after that, they saw I had a tripod. Now on the tripod, I had two Yagis, which are long range Wi-Fi antennas for anyone
Yeah,
doesn't know. And they were connected to a neighbor's Wi-Fi about like a mile and a quarter from me. That's whose Wi-Fi I
that's the
use
way.
to do all my stuff. Yeah. So I know a lot of people are, relying on VPNs as a fallback, which I hate that concept. There was actually a paper, I think, or in the Tor wiki, there's a section that's like Tor plus X. And I think that's the name of the actual article that like the Tor project wrote. And it's a paper about how if you take Tor and you use it with anything else, a proxy, SSH connection, or a VPN, that it severely compromises the security of Tor because
Yeah.
it's another link in the chain that you either don't directly control or you might not know how controlled it is. So I always really like that kind of philosophy, and like a lot of people are like, well, VPN, like they say this, they say that. And I'm like, yeah, but you don't know. Like, you don't own that company. You've never been to their server room. You don't know, anything about it. So
Right.
it's not for sure. And at the end of the day, when we're talking about operational security and we're talking about you doing 30 years, if you fuck up, you better be sure.
Right.
Uncertainty is the worst thing that you can have. It's like, hey, what's up, man? I work at, I don't know. I don't know. I was gonna say Twitter, but I wouldn't want to work there. But I was gonna say Microsoft, and that's even worse. But like big tech company A,
Sure.
and it's like you walk in and like I've never seen you before. I've worked there for 10 years. I've never seen you before, and you're trying to tailgate me into the server room. I'm not sure now. If I'm not sure, should I just be polite and keep it moving? Hey, hell no. Like I should question. What are you doing here? Who are you?
Right.
Do you have
Yeah,
credentials? You know what I
of
mean?
course.
I'm gonna stay right here with you until we figure
Yeah.
this out. So like because if you're not sure and you screw that up, that could be a really big problem.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So for
And
me,
you
like
might be
that,
liable if you don't say something,
yeah. And like at the end
depending
of
on
the
what your working
day,
agreement is.
right, and even in that case, it's like your worst case scenario, you're gonna get fired. You might get sued, right?
Yeah.
Um, but like, are you
Tech
gonna
industry
do?
takes shit serious. The
Yeah,
tech
but
industry
but
does not mess around
but like
with intellectual property and security. It's a kind
but
of a
like
big deal.
it's like, are you gonna get 30 years in federal prison though?
No, probably not.
So
No,
so
you
it's
might get a
like
lawsuit though.
so, right. So, but like at the end of the day, my point was like the repercussions are much more severe. So the tolerance should be much less.
Oh yeah.
And that's my philosophy on it. So like those people that are like, oh well, I'm like, dude, no, you don't. Like you don't. And that's the issue.
Yeah.
Now I know if I use someone else's Wi-Fi, I do know. If somehow I get de-anonymized, it's their IP address. I know.
Right.
And you know, it's at the end of the day. So anyway, so I have these two Yagis. So like they're like, what are these? And I was like, oh, they're Yagis. And they're like a yogi, and I was like, no,
Yeah,
yagis.
yogi.
They're like
It's for
they
yoga. Feel
they
like
like
my mat's upstairs,
mispronounced
yo.
it. I like 5 times. I like it was like teaching a bunch of preschoolers how to
Oh
speak. It
jeez.
was insane, man. So like I was just like, whatever, man.
So let
So
me ask you this. Did you use more than one of your neighbor's Wi-Fi or was it just the one access point?
yeah, so I would switch it up. So there were a couple
Interesting.
that I would use that I would rotate through, and like every time I'm doing it, like my MAC address is spoofed, and yeah, absolutely.
I would have
And
been too paranoid that they would have like triangulated it back to me.
yeah, so like, well, like I said, like it's, if you're gonna do that kind of stuff, it's not a job that, like, if you're prone to anxiety, that's good for you. You just, it's not gonna be. You can have an ulcer in a month.
You can have a heart attack. You get your store set up, get your first order, and you just can't fulfill it.
Yeah, I mean, like, like you're, where you're packaging your stuff. I mean, it's gonna have to be a clean room. You're gonna have to clean it with bleach. You're gonna have to make sure there's no dust in that room. I mean, because it's something like 20 to 30% of dust is dead human skin
Yeah.
cells. That means it's a bunch of DNA.
Yeah.
So like, if you're a slob, like, it's probably not a good idea to be a darknet vendor.
You did it on your bathroom sink.
Like
Felicia's doing her hair.
like ex-military guy who's super thorough and clean, and that'd be a great, because he's going to be super disciplined, and it's like
hey, there you go. There's another veteran's job assistance right there.
There's no dust in the light bulbs.
Yeah,
like it's you're checking it with a white glove.
It's funny you mentioned that. When I was serving, I remember distinctly when I was a younger soldier. I was probably in for a year or two. I was definitely not of legal drinking age. We'll say that. And we were getting ready to leave for Iraq. We were deploying in just a few months. And our sergeants would walk around the barracks and inspect them on the weekends as surprise inspections to keep us out of trouble, because they knew what went on in the barracks. We would like throw not yoga parties. What do they call it? Toga. I got yoga on the brain. we'd throw toga parties and walk around the barracks drinking beer, and we'd get in mop buckets and push each other down the halls and like do mop bucket jousting. Like we get in all types of stupid shit. So I'm underage. I'm drinking in the barracks, and I always knew to clean up before I went to bed. No matter how trashed I was, I would always clean up my room. Because the sergeants, when they did surprise us, they'd show up early, like 6, 7 a.m., on a weekend, on like a Saturday or Sunday. So I cleaned my room the night before. We partied all night Friday, and our commander ordered a inspection the following morning on a Saturday. And sure enough, sergeants came through, and they opened the door into my barracks room, and he's looking around. And my room is fucking spotless, man. I mean, everything's mopped, everything's put away, clothes, bed, everything. It looked perfect. And somehow, this fucking guy, who was a ball buster, he was our platoon sergeant. He was like the higher sergeant, one of the higher sergeants. And he used to be a drill sergeant. So he was like super ball buster kind of guy. He goes straight across my barracks room, lifts up my keyboard, and there's a beer bottle cap underneath it. And that was enough evidence for him that I was drinking in the night before underage. And I got smoked all day. I got destroyed all day. I was strong. I was a strong soldier. But anyways, military people have they definitely have a keen eye for cleanliness. They might make good vendors. Good target vendors.
No, I wouldn't like, for a while I get sent to military school when I was in high school, and I was there for about a year and a half before I get expelled for insubordination. Who would have thought,
nice.
Right? Like,
yeah, right.
Wicked anti-authoritarian. And my TAC officer, his name was Staff Sergeant Drought, and he was forced recon, scout sniper, and
nice.
I would take off because I smoked cigarettes then. I would take, and I'm like 16, I would take off, and maybe I was like 14. I would take off and I would jet into the woods, and I'd zigzag out, and I'd light up a cigarette and just burn it down in like, minute and a half, 2 minutes, like
awesome.
Superman pulls, and then run back. And like, there were so many times that I jetted out there like full speed, as like a 14 or a 16-year-old, zigzagging all the way out full speed. And like, I'd light up and I'd take 2 pulls, and I just like, I'd hear right behind me, Ben! And I was like, oh, and I'm like, a heart attack. And it was him. That dude's forest recon, so he's like a ghost in the woods,
Yeah, there you go.
So he'd bring me in, and I'd throw on like, 2-3 pairs of sweatpants, 2-3 sweatshirts, turn on all the showers, and you do PT, in the bathroom, doing chin-ups and push-ups and sit-ups, and just like, you couldn't get, you get to a point where like, you go to, you go to walk and you can't even walk. You're just
I just imagine
crawling
like
back to your room.
your yearbook photo underneath it. It says like most likely to succeed as federal suspect.
Right. I mean, so what ended up happening, man, was like I got hella jacked,
Yeah, I
because I was
bet. I bet you
constantly working
did.
out, and I
That
got
was
like
me
this.
too.
Yeah, and like he liked me more than a lot of the people that were there, I guess, just because like I just didn't give a shit, and like we had like for discipline, like you would get tours. So like if you got caught fighting, you would get like 5 tours. If you got caught, smoking cigarettes, you'd get like 3 or 2 tours. And what
Nice.
that was is like every day. Now this is in Virginia, so every day you would go out and like you would have like 2 to 3 hours where like you can do whatever you want, free time or whatever, in the afternoon. And if you were like me and you were a screw up, you didn't get any free time. What happened is you had to get into parade uniform and go march in cadence
Oh,
outside in this
jeez.
square in the middle of the parking lot, which is black tar parking lot, super hot. You're in wool
Yeah.
and 3 shirts, and you have your rifle with the cement barrel, and you're walking in cadence, just dying, um, and it's like you're doing that for 3 hours,
Yeah.
and that's every day. So
Oh
when
my
I ended up
god.
getting expelled, um, they expelled me, and they were like, listen, like you can't, the amount of tours that you have, you can't do them. Like even if you were here till you graduated, you never got another tour. You would never be able to finish them. They're like, you have
Awesome.
350 tours right now. Like, so it's literally impossible for you to like. We can't do anything to you. So like, we're expelling you. And that was
Nice.
that was my experience with military stuff.
There you
It
go.
didn't last long. But so like, so getting back to the story. So like yeah, so they raided, they took a bunch of stuff, all the drugs, scales, all that kind of like paraphernalia stuff. Anything they thought was evidence they took. um they found like my mom had married this gentleman who he was a major in the Marine Corps, and he's a teacher now, but awesome dude, I get along with him very, very well.
That's cool.
Super humble guy, super respectful, like the like you so like you're like you meet someone, especially someone like that who's achieved like that dude's a bad motherfucker. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
right
you
off
give
the
him a little
rip,
respect.
you know. So like me and him got along. So he like had this book on I want to say it was like scouting, and like he gave it to me as a gift one time. I checked it out. I really loved it. It was awesome. Like I'm big into like OPSEC and
Yeah, of course.
PERSEC and all that kind of security related stuff. Just being a cyber security geek. Um, so like I had that was one of the things they had found. They're like, "Where'd you get this? Where'd you get? Like, what do you guys think, man? Like I'm a fucking terrorist or something? Like I sell drugs, dude. You know what I mean? Like what the heck? It was crazy to see like the level of like what they knew and what they didn't know. It was really mind blowing. Because like
Did you
you
think
kind
they
of
were
no
always around the corner? Did you like
no
expect
no
them to
no
always be there
no,
before they
but I
got you?
mean I expected them to know like what a Yagi was, I expected them to, have some kind of knowledge
Some
of this
technical
kind of
knowledge.
general stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
like this isn't super advanced stuff we're
Do you
talking
think
about.
that's
I
still
mean,
the deal today? Do you think that they would know to look for those things now?
um, I think that there's at the end of it, there's so much stuff that exists, and the evolution of things is so rapid that I think that it's really difficult to do. I mean, you know, you could take a Wi-Fi pineapple and fit it into a carved out book. Like they're not going through books. They didn't
Yeah.
go through my books, see what was in. I mean, at the end of the day, like depending on how paranoid you want to get, and that's the thing too, like that sliding scale between security and convenience. But anyways, so yeah, I mean they ended up taking off, and I got a letter in the mail saying that I was being indicted federally as a 10-count indictment. Here's a list of the charges. So I'm like, all right. So then like I got a letter and it was like, hey, listen, like you have an arraignment on this day. And like I had state cases before in Rhode Island because there's no county jail in Rhode Island. So if you get caught for anything in Rhode Island, you go into state prison. And I
That sounds
had like
fun.
yeah, and I had well, it wasn't. I mean, honestly, it wasn't bad. Like county jail in southeastern Mass was a fucking nightmare. You know, like I remember, I remember being like 17, man, and I was in the medium. I got sent over to the minimum end of this. It's called Dartmouth. It's in like it's the jail for New Bedford, but it's in Dartmouth, Mass. It's for New Bedford, Fall River, and all these other towns. And like I remember walking down the hallway in the minimum area, and like they have like 7-man cells on each side, and there's like 20 or 30 of them. So there's a shitload of guys. Nothing's locked, and then at the end there's shared bathrooms on each side. Then there's like this glass and wire mesh partition that separates you from like the rec room and the CO. And I remember walking down there in the middle of the night, like going to take a piss, and I heard like bam, 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 bam. And I like it's the fluorescent lights are bright, so like my
Mhm.
eyes are adjusting, and I see like someone there at the glass with their back to me, pounding on pounding, pounding, pounding.
Jeez.
I'm like, what the so like you keep it moving, you mind your own business, because if it doesn't have
Yeah.
anything to do with you, mind your own business, man. So like I just like look down, keep it moving, and like I get closer and closer and closer, but now like because the pounding is so loud, like it's also kind of throws you off because you want to make sure like nothing's actually happening,
Yeah.
like loud sounds can be a trigger, they can mean different things. So like I keep kind of looking up, and I remember I got probably 10 feet away, and the dude must have heard me, and he turned around, and we turned around, it was like it looked like streaks like this just down his face. It was all blood. What had happened was this dude owed someone money, and they came in the middle of the night with a razor blade, and they cut him from
Oh
here
my
to here,
god.
and they tried to peel his skin back and scalp him.
Ugh.
And like he was back, and then like I looked
Fuck.
up, and he just looked at me. It was something from a horror movie, and I was like, "Yeah." I just turned. I was like, "I'm going back to bed. Fuck this shit." But like the
Yeah,
dude
no
was there,
kidding.
like 15 minutes. CO. And I was
Oh
like,
my
"Oh, this place
god.
sucks." But like that's that kind of like stuff. I mean, there's stuff
Holy
like that you see
shit.
all the time, and that's like at the end of the day, like you get to a point where like when
Didn't see that
you
on 60
just get
days
used
in.
to it. Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's just because at the end of the day, they don't want to show shit like that. It doesn't reflect
God
well,
damn.
um, and
That's
that's like
vicious.
county, and it's like how it kind of works with violence. From what I've seen, what I've learned, it's like going from like juvie. You have a very high level of violence. There's fights all the time. It's but there's not a lot of murders, And then like you go to county jail, and there's a little bit more murders. There's a little bit less fights, but the fights are more serious. And then you
Mhm.
go to state and federal prison, and there's a little bit less fights, and there's a lot more stabbings. I mean, you have prison yards that have like no hands policies, which is like you don't fight with your hands. Like if you get a problem with someone else, you and him take a knife and go figure it out.
Holy
Like
crap.
we're gonna deal with this issue once, and that's it. So like that's kind of what it is. So
So
it's
why would you risk going back? That's the only question I could think.
so at the end of the
Because you said
day,
you had been there before, right? Before
yeah,
you
so
had been there
I'd been to
before you were
county,
there.
and then I had went to state prison. I never went to feds, and I wasn't like, oh, let me see what that's like. But it was
Yeah.
it was at the end of the day, like I remember when I went to the state prison in Rhode Island, um, like I like the food in county jail in Mass. It was like you would get like this much oatmeal, and like you would stab it with your spork, and like if you could get it on the first 3 hits, and like the hard rocky part like broke off. So like the oatmeal wasn't soft; it was it'd been out so long that it was hard as a rock.
Wow.
So if you could break through it, then you had good oatmeal, you know.
Yeah.
And like that was kind of, so like when I went to and then, you know, if you didn't get that, you got like 2 hard-boiled eggs and a cold piece of bread, and 2% milk or skim milk. And then like when I went to the ACI, it was like they gave you coffee, a fresh orange,
Oh,
like, you
geez.
know, like it was like I went there, I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh, this is
Stayed at a bed and
amazing.
breakfast.
It's like, because that's the difference. Like that's the
It's
difference
like
though
the Days
between,
Inn.
but that's like in a lot of county jails, the maximum you're going to see guys get is like 2.5 years, you know. But in prison, you got guys who are never getting out. So like if you feed those guys that kind of food, they're
They're
going
gonna
to kill
riot.
people, you know.
Yeah.
And like that's all they have. So like, you know, but it's just crazy because like in the feds, they've gotten so good at managing and manipulating people that like they feed them trash. And they get away with it. Like, I mean, like literal trash. Like, I think this probably the sickest thing I seen was, and like any of your viewers can pull it out, Google it. If Google federal prison system, comma, expired cow hearts, and it was like 175 or 75 million pounds of expired cow hearts that the BOP bought as beef and processed it into beef and fed it to federal prisoners in like 75
BOP's
different
the
federal
Bureau
institutions.
of Prisons, or yeah,
Right. They run
Bureau of
the
Prisons.
federal
Yeah.
prison system. And that's
Is
because like
that is
there's
that
no,
a that's a government entity, right? That's not a
yeah.
corporation named to sound like a government entity. Okay.
Yeah. So the BOP is the federal prison system.
Okay.
That's you know it's ran by the federal government.
Got it.
It's also one of the most expensive things in the federal government, next to the military, obviously.
Yeah.
But and what's interesting is like you have people who work there, who are, you know, they're enlisted in the military, but like maybe they're either not needed overseas, or they've chosen to, like if they have a choice, they've chosen to do their tour here in the States, and they do it and get credit for it in the federal prisons.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is pretty crazy, but it makes sense. Like it's a fucking hostile environment,
Yeah.
right? You know, like,
Right.
so,
They're well geared for it. It's like, oh, you don't want to
um,
go fill sandbags in Iraq? All right. We've got something else you can do.
so I mean, it's crazy. Like, and then seeing the difference between the two. Like, if you see a military officer in charge of a prison versus like a civilian who just works for the feds, it's really crazy the difference. So the military officer, so I had a warden one time named Spalding, and this guy, like he's a spin master. So like he would be like the equivalent of like Goebbels, you know, Hitler, you know, like
Yeah.
his propaganda minister, you
Yeah.
know, this guy, like he would see an inmate, and I would see like people walk up to him and be like, oh, that transfer that I requested. And he'd be like, yeah, that transfer to Kentucky, we're working on it. And like dead on would remember every little detail. And like, he's just like, he wasn't doing it. There's no transfer. You know what I mean? But because he remembered it, this dude like had
They believe
confidence
them.
that there was, and you play the shit out of him. And like, I would watch this, man. I'm like, all these dudes think like the wardens, you know, oh, he said he's working on. I'm like, he's not working on. He's working on you, you dumbass.
Yeah.
Like he's not doing anything.
Oh my God.
But then you would see like he would grant every officer as much OT as they wanted. So a new warden came in and
Time and
took
a
over.
half.
Yeah, a new warden came, and like there were cops there that would do 100 hours, you know, 110 hours,
Wow.
which sounds insane, right? But like what they're doing is every 3 to 6 hours they're getting up to count people in the block, and then they're going and sitting at their desk and sleeping or watching Netflix or
Nice.
shopping on Amazon.
What a
That's what they
gig,
do,
man.
you know, and they make a killing, you know.
And here I
And
thought engineering was a good gig.
so you know, you gotta respect the engineer, man, because like you're using your brain. Like these are people who they can't
Hey,
get a
they're
job
using their
doing
brain
anything
too,
else,
man.
you know.
That takes some
Yeah.
big brain shit to
I've
to work
literally seen like
that
I've
way.
seen CEOs who I swear it can't count. So they walk around with counters and they click
Yeah.
them for every person so they don't lose count. I'm like, oh. Um, we have other ones like so yeah, it was insane, the level of incompetence that really is there.
So
So then
did
then you
you?
would see the female warden that came in, who was like just a regular fed, and she denied all the OT. So all these cops who have been juiced in the system, all their
Yeah,
OT is now
shut
gone.
down.
So here's the thing: when you work for the BOP as like in that position, if you reduce costs, you get a percentage of that if you're not military.
Ah, interesting.
So she got paid. She
Yeah,
killed
I bet
everyone's
she
OT
did.
and she got paid.
I bet she did. That's
So
how it
I mean,
works,
it's like
man.
the whole
That's how it
system's
works.
corrupt. You know,
Oh,
it's just
fuck yeah, it
absolutely
is.
insane. You know,
Top to bottom.
you're talking about like I mean, literally in the 13th Amendment, it says like no one can be a slave unless you're a felon. So it's like
Yeah, unless you're a prisoner, right?
it tells you right there what it is you're going into. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, you don't want to work, you're going to go in solitary. But wait a minute, doesn't Amnesty International classify solitary as torture? Yeah, but it's just it's nuts. But so going, getting back to it, it's like I had taken, I said I'll take on, this responsibility. That was the agreement with my cousin, so I did that. So I go to my arraignment now. My cousin gave me a ride, and my wife's there. And so we get there. I go I go up to the federal courthouse, and my lawyer's there waiting for me. She's like, "Listen, we're gonna go upstairs. We're gonna go to the U.S. Marshal's office. You're gonna self surrender." I'm like, "All right, cool, let's do it." Um, so we go up, we do that. Now, at the same time, I didn't know this, but a couple hours earlier, what had happened was the feds had went back to the house that I was living in originally, where my ex-girlfriend lived. And they showed up, Department of Homeland Security showed up, and like, "Where's Sam Bent? We have an arrest warrant. He's getting arraigned today." And she was like, "Oh, he's not here. I don't know." We're petrified.
I'm
And
surprised she didn't just turn you in.
yeah, so I mean, I was already at the courthouse by the time. But
Ah,
what they wanted to do is they wanted to bring me in handcuffs.
pictures.
Like, oh yeah, look, we brought him in.
Yeah.
The criminal, and I
Yeah, it's
brought
for the
myself
media.
in. Yeah, so I think that really pissed them off. So like at the end of the day, like I'm in a federal holding cell, in the federal courthouse, and I'm waiting to be arraigned. I'm waiting to see the judge. So I'm sitting there and I'm waiting, and I hear a voice, and I know this voice, right? And I'm like, how, so I'm like, I'm listening in. I'm half deaf, so I'm like putting my ears up to the thing, and like I'm trying, and I'm like, and I recognize the voice, and the voice, it's my cousin who was just out in the car, who brought me there, who was also my partner in crime, but no one else knew about it. So
Yeah.
so she was like, so like I hear them, I know what they're doing. They're putting her in a cell. I can recognize the door opening, the door closing,
Sure.
her crying. And so like I wait until I don't hear the cops anymore, which are U.S. Marshals. I wait for them like to walk away or whatever. And I'm like, "Yo, Geneva?" And she's like, "Yeah." Like, you can tell she's through tears. And I'm like, "What are you doing here?" She's like, "What do you think I'm doing here?"
Oh my God.
I was like, dude, I
I'm
was so
surprised they
pissed.
didn't pull her in the first time when they raided
Yeah.
your house.
So, I
Because you
there's a
said they
reason.
had followed her and they knew that she dropped
Yeah,
the package off.
yep. I think there's actually a really good explanation for why, and it makes a lot of sense. I'll get to that too.
Okay.
So so we like they so it's time to see the judge. So they pull me out of the cell, right? They're like, you turn around, face the bars, you put your head against the bars, put your hands behind your back, and they cuff you up to bring you into the courtroom.
Sure.
And then like right before they bring you into the courtroom, they uncuff you. So it's just in transport, basically, that you're cuffed. Because they don't want you like seeing the judge cuffed, because it's like I think it looks bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Sends a bad signal if they're trying to make a
Yeah,
impartial judgment, I bet.
right.
I'm
So
sure there's some psychology behind that.
so I remember like I got cuffed up, and they're like, "Don't move." So I'm like, "All right." So like I watch him walk over this way, and they open the cell, way down the ways, and they're like step out, and she's like, oh, what's going on? They're like, get out, and she's like, oh, okay. And I'm like, oh my god, because like I've been to county, I've been to state prison, like it's not a place. Like this isn't high school, you know what I mean? Like
Sure.
this is a
They're not going to
different
ask you 20
world,
times.
and these guys, a lot of the
They're going to
people
tell
that
you
they're
once.
dealing with, yeah, and a lot of these guys, to their credit, man, these guys are dealing with difficult or really dangerous people on a
Right.
daily basis,
All day. 8
so
hours
like
a day.
so they don't have a tolerance for it,
Yeah.
so but like so
That job has
so
a super high turnover rate too. There's
I
another
believe it.
really good show on Netflix. I forget what it's called, but it's about guards that get into that stuff. You may
Yep.
have seen it, but they yes, those guys don't last very long.
Yep.
If they're not cut
Well,
out for it, they're gone quick.
These guys are U.S. Marshals that we're talking about, which is like they like to say it's like a massive difference between the two. It's like a guy who goes to work for a county jail in his town needs a high school diploma. Like a person who goes to work for the BOP, they want them to have a bachelor's degree. So like when you meet guards in the BOP, if you call them a guard, they get pissed. They're like, I'm not a guard, I'm a correctional officer. I'm like, you're not correcting anything.
Inmate.
This isn't about rehabilitation. Like if it was, you'd have college courses. Like
yeah,
get
right.
the fuck out of here, man. You know what I mean? This is slavery. Like so anyway,
No,
so
get out of my face before I rehabilitate you with my PR-24.
Right. It's like, imagine like some of the guys you've been in the service with, right? Like you have a lot of guys who are in environments like that, or even like a nurse who's been a nurse for a while. They get desensitized,
Yeah.
and they get to a point where it's like they can see someone's arm blown off or get their their head blown off, and they're just like, all right, keep it moving and just do whatever they got to do. So like when they pull her out and they're like turn around and she's like, oh, what's going on? And they're like, turn around, we're not gonna tell you. She like turns around and like put your head on the bars, put your hands behind your back, and she's like, oh, are those handcuffs? And they're like, yeah. And they're like, oh, she's like, oh, it's really dirty in there, meaning like the cell she was just in. He's like, it's really dirty in there. She's like, did you guys clean those cuffs after the last person? So like, I'm still
we put alcohol wipes on them.
I'm still cuffed, and I'm like looking over, and I'm laughing my ass off, man. Like I'm dying, and I'm dying. I'm laughing my ass off, and like and so like they look over at me, and they see me laughing my ass off. And they're like, they look at me and they're like, they look back at her. They're like, oh yeah, we sanitize them all the time. And she's like, oh, okay. And then they cuff her up. And I look at them and I'm like, I look at the U.S. Marshals and I'm like, what the fuck? Like I stopped laughing. I'm like, what the fuck? And they look at me and they're like,
awesome.
So then we head down to court. And oh no, I'm sorry. We head to the interview room. So she goes to her lawyer, I go to mine, and it's the prep before our arraignment.
That's interesting that you guys had separate lawyers.
Yeah. So so it was like they called it a conflict of interest. So right after I got raided,
in case they're going to testify against each other.
Right. Right after I got raided, I sat down and I wrote down everything the feds did, what they said, what they took, how they acted, what happened. And then I called up the federal public defender's office in Burlington, and like no one was there. So I tried calling like the next day, no one was there. So it was like a week before I got a hold of someone. And I was like, listen, I just got raided. Here's the deal. I'm emailing you guys an affidavit that I signed and dated saying what happened, when it happened. And they were like, all right, they're like, listen, like, we can't do anything for you. I was like, what are you talking about? And they're like, oh, like, you have to be arraigned. You have to have charges against you before we can do anything. So I'm like, all right, whatever. So when I got arraigned, I had, like anything, when I come up against a challenge, I research it, because that knowledge empowers you. So one of the things I had seen was,
I want to say it's the battle.
Yeah, and I want to say, I could be totally wrong, but I want to say it was a CBJ board. And I don't remember what the acronym stands for, but basically a CBJ board is like a group of private lawyers that represent federal defendants, and the United States government pays them their premium for representing you instead of the federal public defender's office. Um,
Interesting.
so being like, being dealing with the state and dealing with the county jails, you have like a natural aversion to public defenders, because a lot of them are trash. They're overworked, underpaid. Like they get like $200 a case. They don't give a shit about you.
Yeah, aren't they
Like
like the
they
entry
just,
level lawyers? Isn't that what a
yeah, a
public
lot of
defender
them.
is
Yeah.
usually?
So
It's like they just
yes.
got their
Yeah.
law degree. They want to practice, but they need to build up a
Yep.
case history before they can get into like a partnership or whatever those are. The
Yeah. So I
Smith
mean, some
Smith
of them.
and John or whatever
Yep.
law firm.
Yes. Yeah. So some of them do it just because they want to do like a public service,
Sure.
but others do it, yeah, for that exact reason. So I had a natural aversion to these, public defenders, but
Yeah, of course.
in feds, it's not like that. In feds, actually, the federal public defenders are, for the most part, pretty good in comparison
Probably
to
because they know the
theirs.
system though. They're familiar with
Right.
like how everything works.
Right.
Interesting.
So the CBJ board, it sounds weird, right? Like, listen, the people that are trying to persecute you or prosecute you are going to pay for your criminal
For your
defense.
Yeah,
So
it does
that
sound
would
like
like,
a conflict of interest.
right. I mean, so it would immediately kind of like turn someone off, but there's a reason for it. So, and it's smart. So it's like the reason they pay is because they know these lawyers are they're very good at what they do. So why would
They're
they
probably more
want,
likely to settle.
well, so what they are is they're so qualified that at the end of the day, if you're convicted, there is no way in hell that you can file an appeal and say that it was insufficient assistance of counsel, which is the most common appeal type. So
That's
when
interesting.
so when they do that, they spend 150 grand or
It's
50
saving
grand
the
in
money
your
in the long
defense.
run.
Right, right. So like that is one of the things they asked me. They're like, "Do you want a federal public defender or do you want an attorney from the CBJ board?" And I was like, "Yeah, give me the CBJ board, man. Like I'm good. Hell yeah. Pay lawyer, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely." So they hooked that up, and then they were like, "Okay, well, Miss Bent, my cousin, they were like, she doesn't have a lawyer." She was like, they were like, in order for her we don't have another lawyer available on the CBJ board, so we're going to have to assign her to the federal public defender's office. But because you sent an affidavit signed about like what happened the day you got raided, it's a conflict of interest for the office to take her on as a client.
Interesting.
So I had effectively, totally unintentionally, blocked her from having a defense. So they said, one thing you can do is you can sign this consent form that says that you are going to be okay with her being represented by the federal public defender's office. And I was like, yeah, sure. I mean, what the hell? Why not? I already said I did everything right. Like, what? You know what I mean? So they're like, all right. So they went with that, and so my cousin lived with me for another like year and a quarter with me and my wife, and it was all good. And then one day, I had a Franks hearing, so we were able to prove that law enforcement broke the law in order to raid the house to begin with. So how I had structured my business was like when you play chess. If you're really good at chess, you can anticipate 20 moves ahead, and you can set it up so your opponent at the end of the game is going to have like their king in this corner, right? Or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You can force that opponent to do something, right?
Sure.
So how I set my business up, that's how it was set up. Like you if you wanted to catch me, you could, but you would have to break the law. And that's what they did. They cut a package open with no warrant. Then they found drugs in it, and they used those drugs to apply for the search warrant. So how it goes is like, if you can prove that, they broke the law in order to catch you, which is extremely difficult to do, then everything from the point they broke the law, everything they got from breaking the law is gone, which would be everything. It would be my admission. It would be all the drugs. It would be any other evidence that they found is gone,
Wow.
which means they have nothing. Which means there's no indictment, and the feds have a 99% conviction rate. So beating the feds is an achievement.
It's a big deal. Yeah.
It's a big deal. And like, I know when I was in federal prison, I was looking at the law library, finding a case where someone had been granted a Franks hearing was super difficult. It's just something that's very, very rare.
So you were granted this hearing after you were incarcerated?
No, so I hadn't been incarcerated yet. So I had been arraigned, and then I was released on my own recognizance.
Okay, got it.
That day, yeah. So I should have mentioned that. So after we had the meeting with our lawyers, like we went and seen the judge, and the judge released us on our own recognizance. There's we're not violent criminals. There's no nothing like that. So there's no theft or any property or anything like that.
There's
so
no reason to hold you.
Right. So that was that. So we had like our dates, court dates set, and we went to them and all that. And then so the United States prosecutor had contacted my lawyer, and he was like, "Listen, it's like 3 days before this Franks hearing." Now my lawyer's explained what a Franks hearing is, and she's like, "Listen, I can't guarantee anything, because not selling brake pads, but
Sure.
At the end of the day, like there's a very good chance that all these charges are going to get dropped because everything they got is fruit from the poisonous tree."
Yeah.
So
yeah, it was after they already broke the law. So
yep. So I'm
not gonna work out for 'em.
amped.
Yeah.
There's a lot of planning that went into this. It was super premeditated. And like with that in mind, she was like, "Oh, well, he wants to know if you'd be interested in a plea deal." Well, all right. So let me rewind a little bit. So prior to that meeting, my lawyer had contacted me, and she was like, "Oh, listen, like the United States attorney wants to know if you want to come in and have a discussion with him." And I was like, "About what? What do we have to talk about?" Trying to send me to
Mission
prison,
buddies,
dude.
man.
Yeah. So so she was like, "Oh, he wants to know if you want to come in and give a proffer." So I'm like, I've never heard the term before.
Yeah, I've never heard that before.
So I'm like, what's a proffer? And she's like, "Oh, well, like a proffer, legally speaking, it's like, when you come in, I sit down with you as your lawyer, and we sit down with the United States Attorney's Office, and you tell them about what you did, when you did it, who was involved, who did what." And I was like, now, like, mind you, man, like when I'm doing this, like I'm dealing with, we'll say at least 2 different cartels that I have a very good business relationship with. I talk to these guys on a regular basis, and
they know you and where you live.
So she's like, you come in, you tell them, like what you did, who you did it with, what, all this different stuff. And I was like, like, listen, man, like that sounds a lot like snitching to me,
Yeah.
And she's like, "We don't call it that, we don't call it that. That's not what it's." I was like, "Listen,
but
the people I work with absolutely would, I was like, I'm good. You know what I mean? Like I've already admitted to everything. Like I'm good. You know what I mean? Fuck that. I have no problem admitting what I did, but that's where it ends. You know what I mean? I'm a man. I'll take the hit for what I did, but that's where it ends. I'm not putting anyone else in a box." So,
sure.
So she's like, "All right." So anyways, we fast forward now, and we're coming up to this Franks hearing. United States attorney's like, "Hey, listen, I don't want to go to this Franks hearing in 3 days. Do you want to sign a plea deal?" And like my lawyer asked me this, for him. And I was like, "What's he high?" Must be some good shit. Hell no.
Really, what he's saying is we're about to lose, and we want to see if we can sucker you into admitting guilt.
I'm like,
so that we can win.
Tell him to run into a knife. Like, what do we care? Like, I'm good, man. Like we're about to kick his ass. And she's like, "Well, nothing's guaranteed." I was like, "Yeah, I understand that, but I also understand the concept as you've explained it, and the criteria matches." You know what I mean? So she's like, "Okay, well, did you have a chance to read your PSR?" Now, a PSR. So when you're charged by the state, when you're charged by the county, you really don't have this. It's not really this big deal, right? That's why you hear people say it's not a federal case. Like a federal case is a big fucking deal. So like when you have one, the United States Probation Office does a massive investigation on you. They look at everything that's ever happened that they can find about you throughout your whole life.
Wow.
Any criminal charge you ever caught, that story is documented. It's put in there. If when you were a kid, you got one of your parents kicked you in the head a bunch of times, beat the shit out of you, put you in the hospital. That's in there.
Wow.
So literally everything about you is in there, health wise. Anything you could think of, your life story is in that PSR.
Wow.
And the judge reads that, and that's how he sentences you. So he says, this is the crime, this is what it carries. Now I can give you more time or less time, depending on what the circumstances are of the crime and depending on who you are, right?
Hmm.
Um, so she's like, did you read your PSR? And I was like, yeah, I mean, I read most of it. It's like a super. So I didn't know it at the time. This is the most important document in the case, like by far. So because this document's going to determine where you do time, how you
Yeah.
how much time you're going to get, all that stuff. But I'm just like, oh, it's like a story of my life. Why am I going to waste my time in reading it? So she's like, oh, she's like, it's a really important document. You need to go review it. And I was like, all right, so I go and I'm reading it, and I get to page 15 or whatever, and I get to page 15, and it's it's just the same old stuff, telling me about my own life, and I get to page 15, and it says Geneva's proffer, and I was like, what the fuck is this?
She turned you in?
I was like, what the fuck is this? And I started reading it, and it's like, he would have me ship these boxes, but I didn't know what was in them, and I wasn't given a choice. I was like, what?
Oh my God.
So she quit her job in Massachusetts, and she lived in Rhode
Uh,
Island her whole life. She quit her job to move up because she knows when I do something, I'm very driven, and it's probably going to succeed. And she wanted to be a partner in that, which is why she came up. I didn't.
yeah.
So I didn't drive down there and drag her up, and make her move. So it was completely voluntary. So it was Geneva's proffer, and I was reading about it, and she was like, I didn't know what was in it, and I'm like at the end of the day, her split was a percentage of the profit for each box. So not only did she know what was in it, she knew how much of it was in there and what the profit ratio was per package. So it was just.
So she knew.
So what blew my mind was I did what I said I was going to do. I took the blame, and even after that, you still threw me under the bus, and that's what really blew my mind. Is I've known her,
Yeah.
25 years, man. It's so it was a shocking thing. It really shouldn't have been, I've been around enough criminals to kind of know, but you definitely in federal prison, you definitely end up meeting some of those dudes who I met a lot of people who were a lot like me, were highly intelligent, big time, money making dudes that were a lot more ruthless than me. Probably one of the most interesting dudes I met was a guy named Michael Fitzgerald who he had 8 life sentences. And you ever see the
Wow.
movie The Town?
No, I haven't.
No. So the movie The Town, it's about how in Charlestown, Mass, bank robbers. It used to be. Now it's all yuppies. Well, a lot of it's yuppies. But back in the day, it was like a trade craft passed on from father to son, robbing banks. And there were more bank robberies in the Charlestown, Massachusetts area than there were anywhere else in the world, right? So they had perfected this craft of bank
Wow.
robberies. And Michael Fitzgerald, they call him the old man. Um, he had been in prison for 41 years when I met him. He used to extort the bank robbers in Charlestown.
Wow.
So if you ever
The
watch The Town,
balls.
yeah. So if you ever watch The Town. There's a guy in the movie called the Florist, and that was Fitz. If you go on
Wow.
Pacer and you read his paperwork, you'll see he owned a flower shop, and he took part in a multi-million-dollar cocaine conspiracy, and had a lot of people killed. And that's who he was. He's a mass murderer and a drug dealer, and he's you look at him and It's like 70 something, and you know, it's like, this dude in this wheelchair, Irish, to the core. Um, but like you look at him and he just looks like the friendliest dude ever. And it's like, this dude, man, you put two in your head without without even thinking
Wow.
about it.
That must be there. I bet you there's a lot of people in there with some crazy stories.
Yeah, I mean, but he was my best friend in Feds.
Wow.
And like he
So
was,
how did you get to that point?
yeah.
Um,
So with the plea deal, right? So I seen what it said. So I called my lawyer back, and I'm like, yeah. So I read, what she said and all this, and she's like, so listen. She was like, because of that, we could go, and I had a 10-count indictment. She was like, we could get counts 2 to 10 killed because of the Franks hearing. But count 1, which was a conspiracy charge, she was like, we can't get rid of that now
that's
because
conspiracy to commit fraud or money
no,
laundering.
just to sell drugs. It's a
Oh,
drug
just to sell
conspiracy.
drugs. Okay,
Yeah,
got it.
drug conspiracy.
Sorry. Yeah.
Um,
I
so
thought you had said before that they had gotten you on the guy that you were washing money through, laundering money
yeah,
through
so
in New York.
so when I sold that guy Bitcoin,
Yeah.
that was one of the things they cited as a reason for it. But
Okay.
if you think
Right.
about it, it makes no sense because I'm not bound by KYC because I'm not a banking institution,
Yeah.
and it's not illegal. So
That's right.
that
Yeah.
that makes
Yeah,
absolutely
that's
no
not illegal.
sense.
Yeah.
But again, like the double think that they use and the double
Yeah.
speech that the feds use, it's brilliant, man. It really is. Like, but they're masters at the paper shuffle. And that's
Yeah.
what we're talking. That's why it's
Oh
taken
yeah.
me. That's why it takes me 3 hours to break this down to you, though. Because
Yeah.
this
Oh
is the
yeah.
maze that we're in.
It
So
is a maze, and it's intentionally a maze because they
yeah,
don't want people to understand how the system
right,
works. They want people to be as confused as possible, so we have to use their assets to navigate it, and then they can control the environment.
for sure. So so with that, like my
I
lawyer
mean,
was like,
there's a
listen,
reason they have a 99% conviction rate. I mean,
yeah,
there's a
yeah.
reason for it for sure.
Yeah, show me a boxer that has that after 110 years.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
you know,
Or
um,
any other service or bureau of
yeah,
anything. Their government can't even put freaking hammers together without spending like 10 grand, you know?
yeah,
Like you
yep,
think they're gonna keep a conviction rate like that if they weren't stacking the deck in their
yep,
favor?
yep. And it's at the end of the day, it's because it's something that's profitable. But that's a whole side issue.
Oh yeah.
So like with that, so she was like, listen, like because she admitted to what she did, now you're both stuck with this conspiracy. Her only charge was conspiracy, and it was because she talked. So she literally shot herself in the foot, but she also shot me in the foot. Had she
Yeah.
had she listened to what I said when we had set up our security policies on shipping, we would have never had any issues. Had she listened to me when I said, and I taught her about her rights and just don't say anything, she would have been all right. So there were multiple chances where we had fallbacks, contingency plans, but she screwed up every single one of them, which is why I ended up in the position I was in. So she was like, listen, like at the end of the day, you'll beat, the 9 charges, but you'll still have that one conspiracy charge. And going for the Franks hearing, like bucking, after that, he's just going to take it to trial. And then once you get to trial, it's a totally different thing.
Yeah.
They're going to try to drill you as hard as possible to
Yeah,
make an
because
example.
they want you to take the ride as long as you can.
Yeah, like a great example of that. I met a guy who owned a business where he contracted doctors that worked for him. It was all legal. Contracted doctors that worked for him. These doctors would see patients, evaluate them, and write prescriptions. But they worked like in his clinic,
Mhm.
and so he made this business of it, and like he didn't pay taxes, and at the end of the day, like he gets screwed for that, right? So he gets charged federally for tax
IRS will
evasion.
get you.
Yep.
Nobody gets away from the IRS.
yeah, so they bring him up, and they bring him up, and they're like, the federal prosecutor or the United States attorney is like, listen, sign this plea deal. We'll do it for it's like 3 years and 20 grand in restitution, or we'll take you to trial. And he was like, well, fuck you, I'll go to trial. And they're like, all right, cool, yeah, whatever. So they take him to trial. The dude gets 25 years and $2 million in restitution. Like they're
Wow.
smoking you. It's like almost like a knee-jerk reaction when I meet someone in feds and they're like, "Oh, I went to trial," and I'm like, "What? Like, why would you do that? Like, what? Like, you went to trial and you didn't have $5 million to spend on your defense? You're crazy, you know." And like even those dudes, because those dudes
Well,
exist, you know.
and even
They
going up
even.
against the IRS, like, look, let me tell you, the words of wisdom to anybody listening. There are
Mhm.
two old white men in this world that will always get paid. One is Uncle Sam, and the other is Jesus. And they, I mean, you walk down the block and you see like these churches. They're made of like stone, and they're 300 years old. That ain't because they were good craftsmen. It's because Jesus gets paid, and
Yep.
like he's got that money. And Uncle Sam, he will find you. He will find you after you're dead, and he will nickel and dime you to
Yep.
get every penny out of you. Like
Yeah.
the
And at the end
fighting
of
the
the day,
IRS is a losing battle.
those massive churches are still paying $1 a year in taxes for property
Yeah,
tax. You know?
yeah, yeah. And then on top of it, the churches they skate taxes. That's what.
You know?
Yeah, they respect each other.
So but so like so she's like, like this conspiracy charges, you're hit. Like there's no getting around that. She's already written the statement, so I'm like, all right. So she's like, listen, like he's gonna go for 10-year mandatory minimum
Oh,
for the conspiracy charge, which now
10 years.
when I first caught my charges, I had a 10 count indictment, okay? And I looked up each charge and I saw that with each charge, the maximum penalty was 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
So do the math, 10 times 20. I'm like, okay, my absolute worst case scenario is I get 200 years. Like I'm dying
Yeah.
in prison. So when you're looking at that, like, and I'm a pessimist, so I look at that and I'm like, okay, that's what it is. So now, like, there's like this switch that went off in my head where I'm like, I'm going to, I'm going to go in prison. I'm going to die there. I'm going to be, and you kind of reserve yourself to that because like trying to worry or have anxiety over the inevitable to me is moronic. So you just kind of resign yourself to it. You resign yourself to your own death because you just don't have a choice.
Yeah.
And that's how I saw it. So I was like, all right, it is what it is. I'm going to fight it, but it is what it is. So, going forward, so like when she said, "Oh, like a mandatory minimum of 10 years," I was like, "Really?"
Is
So
that all?
so she was like, "Yeah, but the plea deal is if you sign the plea deal, he'll give you, he'll say a maximum of 108 months, which is 9 years." So I was like,
So you get
"Really?"
an extra year.
So I'm like, no, I get a year. So it's a year. So if I sign
Oh,
the
it's
plea
either the
deal,
max is
it's
9. Yeah.
the max is 9 years.
Yeah.
And
So you
if
get
like
less than that.
we go he's going to go for a 10-year mandatory minimum, which
Oh,
means there's no good time. You're doing 10 years
yeah.
flat. So when she was like, oh, like 9-year max. I'm like, yeah, fuck you. You want me to sign the plea deal today? Like, hell yeah. That ain't shit.
Like
So
you're
like
getting a new car or something. Like,
I
let's
was
do
so I was
this.
so excited, man. Because for a year and a half, you don't know what you're gonna get, and you've resigned yourself to death. So, like
Yeah.
when you're thinking in those terms, 9 years is a fucking
It's
joke,
not that
you know.
long. Yeah.
And then you look at, well, now you get you got good time. You're doing 85% of your time, so it's not even gonna be 9 years. Now in the federal system, there's no parole, so 85% of your time is the best you can hope for.
Hmm.
Um, so like we ended up. I went signed the plea deal, went in front of the judge, change of plea. Um, went for my sentencing, and the judge gave me 60 months. So
Nice. I mean,
I
not
was
nice,
amped.
but better than what
No,
it could
that's
have been.
great. Yeah, no, it was absolutely. I was amped. For like I got
Yeah.
5 years. And I had my manhood and my honor. I
Yeah.
didn't fucking tell on anyone. So I was happy with that, man. I can still hold my head up. So I was good enough with that. So anyways, so like I got that, and then I'm like, you know, I was like, 5 years, but like at the end of the day, again, you got good time. So it's not even 5 years. So I'm like,
Yeah.
nice, so, I ended up going in, and COVID wasn't a thing, didn't exist then. I
What
was in
year was
prison.
this that you went in?
So I turned myself into the federal prison system, um, October 1st in 2019.
Okay, so yeah, right before COVID, really.
Yep. Yep.
You had just
So
enough
like
time to get comfortable.
well, I had just enough time to get there and for COVID to hit, which was
Yeah.
a great thing. Now, for everyone else that was in there, it was a horrible thing. You've had over 300 inmates die from COVID, and like there's a saying in the
Which
BOP
is
that no one,
tragic.
yeah, well they have a saying in the
It's
BOP
tragic.
that no one dies in the BOP, and that's because what happens is like if you get stabbed to death or you have a heart attack, what they do is they take you out and they check your pulse on the way to the hospital so they can pronounce you dead on the street, not in the prison. So it doesn't count towards
Numbers
their death
game.
rate, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, I can't tell you how much I'd love to do a FOIA request and see how high the heart attack rate went
Man, that
up
shit is
since COVID.
so bad throughout the entire government. Having been a part of the government, I can honestly say that I remember, and anybody that's a veteran out there for any branch of the military, I guarantee will say the same thing. We would go to the shooting range, and they would allot so much ammo every year to every unit. They would say, okay, you have 120 soldiers, you need 10,000 rounds of M 5.56 or whatever, and then you would take your unit out to the range a few times a year, and everybody in your unit had to qualify. So they would always some people are good shots, some people are bad shots, it's just how it is. And some people would take more than one time to qualify, and they would need extra ammo, so they would always ask for extra ammo. Well, inevitably at the end of the year, we would have lots of ammo left over, and I'm not just talking about for an M4. I'm talking about ammo for 50 cals, for M249s, all the way up to Mark 19 grenade launchers. Like we would have a
Yep.
Mark 19 grenade launcher is an automatic grenade launcher. For anybody that doesn't know,
Yep.
it shoots grenades like a mile and a half away. It's awesome to shoot. And but we had I was a military police officer. We had all these weapon systems assigned to us, and we would always have tons of ammo left over. So at the end of the year, our command would do the responsible thing and turn all that ammo back over to the government, so we didn't have any wasted money. No, no, that's most certainly not what happened. What they actually did was on the last range day of the year for that type of ammo, any ammo that was left over, they would make everybody go out there and just blow it off in a mad heat. We would just sit out there and just shoot. There would be no aiming, no targets. We would just shoot. Um, and we'd burn through all that ammo, because what would happen is if you took 10,000 rounds for your unit this year and you only use 8,000 of them, then next year they're only going to give you 8,000 of them, or
Yep.
maybe even less.
Yep.
And they didn't want that. They always wanted to. So every year they would ask for more. Every year they would want to be on the safe side and ask for a little bit more. So every single year you'd have more and more ammo and less that you would use. It was ridiculous. Huge is the biggest boondoggle I have ever seen in the military. And I guarantee it still happens to this day. I guarantee it.
Yeah.
I've been out of the military for over 10 years, and I guarantee that still happens. It's just one of
Like
those things.
how crazy do you think that system would be if you gave them 125,000 people that they had to pay a few pennies an hour to do work?
Oh my God. It would be wild. Man, we'd have some clean barracks. I know that.
Yeah,
They have clean everything.
Even with that, I mean the federal prisons are still shit and it's fucking disgusting.
Yeah.
But like yeah, so I mean at the end of the day, man, it was crazy. So I ended up going in and I remember when I went in, they were like, "Oh, you have warrants in Mass," which I had already gotten cleared up. I had warrants for like 15 years, and like I was like, I cleared them up, and they're like, "Prove it." Like, what?
Yeah, let me hop on Google here, bitch.
So I was like, well, how am I supposed to do that? I like missed my case manager. I was in SHU for like 7 to 14 days when I got there. I got out of solitary, go to
Yeah,
my
she was
unit.
solitary confinement, right?
Yeah, so like it's standard procedure. Everyone goes there when they first come in. So then
Why
they
is
send
that?
you to just because they takes time to classify you. Because computers don't exist,
I thought maybe it was a socialization thing. Maybe they were trying to get you socialized for prison, not just kind of like dunk you
No,
in the
I think
tank.
yeah, I think it's a mental. I definitely think it's a mental thing. But like I've been to Shoe County. So like Like it wasn't. I mean,
How
people
bad is it?
definitely lose their shit. There, it's definitely, it's not a good place. It's the spot in the prison that has, the most serious people. You got people who murdered people, who just murdered and maybe murdered a guard. Like you have
Wow.
you have people who are on their way to, like, so for example, in that shoe, like, all right, so someone recent that's been in that shoe was like the Boston bomber,
Mm.
um
Yeah,
so
fuck that
like,
guy.
yeah, so I mean, like, you have, like, some whack jobs, man, that are there, and you have like dudes that are never getting out. You got guys who that are in there who, like, you come in, let's say you're just some tax guy, and like you come in and this guy's been in prison for 30 years. He's got nothing better to do. So to entertain himself, he fucks with you, and he, buddies up to you. Like seeing dudes do, like, they'll buddy up to these newbies. Then you go in there like, oh, hey man, what's your name? And like these dudes, because they come from the street, they're like, oh, my name's John. Oh, where you from, John? Oh, I'm from here. They come in there and they're like, oh, hey man, what's your name? Like, dude, what the fuck do you care? My friend. You know what I mean? Like, just leave me alone. I walk in there with a scowl and I got a shaved head, and they're not talking to me anyway. Like,
You know,
it's
crazy
one
story
of
about the
us.
Boston bomber. Crazy story about the Boston bomber. I was there the day that he did that.
No shit.
Yeah, we were in Boston for a hackathon. I had just become an engineer, and we were out there for, I think it was like a Nokia or something like that hackathon, and we were building Windows Phone apps at the time. Um, and we left. We had to be back to work on Monday, so we left right away and started driving back, and we literally just missed it. We drove right by there, and then if that's not crazy enough. Um, you remember the Vegas shooting, right, from Mandalay Bay?
Yep. Yep.
I was there right before that happened.
Yep.
And you remember the this is going to paint me in a bad light, but you remember the uh, garage that collapsed recently in Miami? It was
No,
a
I didn't
building.
hear
I'm
about
sorry,
that.
not the garage, a building. It was a building that collapsed in
Yeah.
Miami.
Yep. Yep.
I
Yep.
was
Yep.
there that week. Um,
Don't
yeah,
come
right.
near me, man.
and then and then I don't know if you heard about it, but there were these they call it the Stonehenge of Georgia. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, yeah,
That
yeah.
got
The
blown up.
population should never go above 500,000.
I
Yeah,
was
yeah, yeah,
there the
yeah.
week that thing blew up. I was
That's
actually in
awesome.
Atlanta when that thing blew.
That's
I am like a
awesome.
shit magnet. Every time I
That's
leave and I
probably the
travel
best one.
somewhere,
Yeah, that's
I'm
awesome.
everywhere. But I did not do it. I swear to God, I didn't do any of those things. I know that my proximity to all these things is crazy, but yeah,
They
I swear I did not
start
do
out a
it.
podcast. So DHS investigating you for terrorism
Yeah,
now.
they're gonna be knocking on my door. Next thing I know, they're
At
gonna be
least they're polite, man.
tapping my lines.
Yeah, I'll give them that. At least they're halfway polite. When they come.
Yeah.
But if they're investigating terrorism, they might not be so polite to you. I was just a drug trafficker.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm never getting through the TSA again. They're going to be sticking fingers up my butthole for sure.
Yeah, like that was like I met the kid who shot up LAX. He was there
Oh
too.
my God. That's
But like,
crazy.
yeah, man, like, and that's what it is. But so like, I mean, like you'll go in there and you'll hear stories about like these, those kind of like innocent, not, he's not innocent, but I'm saying like the people that go in there for like screwing up on their taxes, or like
Yeah.
I met a kid who was there who was selling bootleg NFL jerseys. And because it was like licensed and he was doing it interstate, they charged him federally, and gave him like, 5 or 6 years. But like those kind of people, like when you have just super evil dudes, like demons in human form,
Yeah.
that,
Oh yeah.
like these dudes will chat these dudes up, get them going, get them thinking they're their friend. One story about this dude, I forget what the fuck his name was, but like he was chatting up this newbie. Like this dude he was being transferred. So like, you know, when you're in transit, sometimes you're in transit for 6 months, and it's like, you know, you're in shoe for 6 months, going from
Yeah.
one prison to another to another to another. Um, and like, you know, this dude, you know, already had a bunch of bodies on him, and he's in solitary, he's bored. So like, there's this new kid who came in, and like the student started, you know, fucking with him, talking to him through the door, and like, you're all in solitary, so he's like, you can still get hurt, but like, it's a little bit more difficult to do stuff like that. But like, so he starts talking to this kid, and you know, getting him to tell him who he is, tell him about him, and he's like, oh, like, he's telling the kid like, yeah, like, I only got like a year left, and the kid's like, yeah, I got like, 3 years or whatever the kid got, and so he's like, he's he's bonding with him,
He's grooming
and
them.
then like, yeah, so he gets to a point where, he's telling him, he's like, listen, like, you know, he's like, oh, how do you put it? It was like, do you like, he's like, I like the wacko was like, I like chicks with blue hair, and like the kid was like, what? And he was like, oh, like, next time the CO comes by, tell him you need a mop. And the kid's like, what are you talking about? So the thing is, like, in the feds, the mops, the mop heads are
Yeah.
blue.
Oh
So
yeah.
he's like, get that, he's like, get a mop. So the kid doesn't get it. And he's like, listen, like, get a mop, put it on, and then like he's talking about like, I'm gonna become, so they have like almost like trustees, and they're orderlies that take care of the unit, because the COs aren't clean and shit.
Yeah.
And the dude's like telling him like, listen, I'm an orderly, so like, I'm gonna get out of my cell, get the mop head, and we can fuck around. Like, he's telling him,
Yeah.
basically to do
They're gonna
homosexual
hook up.
stuff. Um, and the kid's like, no, he's like, I'm not. That's not who
I'm
I am.
good.
I'm not about that. And the dude's like, I don't care what you're about. He's like, listen, I get out in a year. I know your name. I know your girlfriend's name. I know where she lives. I'll go fucking rape your mom and kill your
Oh
fucking girlfriend.
Jesus.
You know what I mean? Or you're gonna do this, and that like that kid ended up killing himself. You know what I mean? So
Oh
like,
my
but like
God.
that, there's no repercussions for that dude. Like, he doesn't care. It's funny
Yeah,
to
he
him,
doesn't care.
and that is gonna be a story he's gonna go on to tell and like laugh about with some of the other socio and psychopaths that are in
That's
there, and like,
insane.
that's the kind of shit. And like, so like, but that's why I'm so adamant against like, nonviolent offenders or drug offenders going to places that are like that, because at the end of the day, you're putting them around these elements that are like super hardened criminals who
Yeah.
are going to change the focus of this individual completely. And when you let that person out, that person's now he's a hardened criminal, as opposed to, someone
They're
who.
socialized in a different way, it sounds like.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah,
Like it
absolutely.
erases their identity.
It's a totally different world. It's like, you go into the military. It's no, there's no
Yeah,
like,
I
oh,
was
I
gonna say
fell, I
it's the same
skinned,
thing, yeah.
yeah, I skinned my knee. Like, there's none of that shit. Like,
My son Bitly was thinking about the military, and he asked me what the training was like, and I told him, I said, well, it's really not that complicated. They take you in as a civilian and whatever personality you've developed up to
Mhm.
18, and then they wipe the slate clean, they break you down into nothing, and then they rebuild you as a soldier, and you are
Yeah.
effectively a different person when you come out. I was a little asshole when I was in school. And when I was in
Mhm.
high school, I barely graduated. I had C's and D's. I was a horrible student. I definitely would have never considered a career in software. Um, and I had no good prospects in my life. So I went into the military, and it changed. I mean, it changed my life for the better,
Of
honestly.
course. Yeah.
They disciplined me, gave me work ethic, or at least helped me discover the work ethic I had inside.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's exactly what they do, and they're very open about it. They will
Yep.
wipe the slate and rebuild you as a person. And I'm sure any traumatic experience like that, prolonged traumatic experience such as prison, would do the same thing.
For sure. Yeah, it's
Absolutely,
designed
yeah.
to. Yeah, it's designed to do the exact same thing
It's
as
very
is to
paramilitary in a lot
break
of
you down.
ways,
Absolutely. Yeah. Hell yeah.
making people
Yeah.
walk in certain
Yep.
ways and say certain
Yep.
things, and
So
that
this, yeah. So
control over your mind.
the downfall is there's like, at the end of the day, the guy in your unit isn't going to put a knife in your neck. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I mean, Smedley Butler, who is the most highest decorated Marine, said that, he went, from, being a, enlisted into, I think, being a general. And he said he never had an original thought until he left the military. He had a great book, great book called War's a Racket. And like one of the things he compares in
It's
it
the truth.
is the fact that he was like, in I'm gonna screw this up, but like, so he says like, in his time in the military, how he had, helped United Fruit get a foothold in South America. He had like liberated all these different interests for all these big corporations and banks. And he said, essentially, I was a high priced financier slash, warmonger for these business interests to
Yeah.
get a foothold in all these different countries, to establish, different rules or dictates in these different countries. And he was like looking in the book, he says, looking back on it, I think I could have given Al Capone a run for his money. I was able to control all these different covert and overt, things that were happening on 7 different continents at a time. And the best he could hope for was a few city blocks.
Love it.
I was like, oh man, this is the most highly decorated Marine in history, So I get sentenced. Like I go into federal prison. They say, you have warrants. They stick me in a medium / high security with a bunch of lifers and super violent dudes.
Yeah.
And I'm there for about 8 months until I can prove that I don't have warrants. And then I prove it to them, and they're like, "Oh, that's great. Now you have to wait, until we give you the meeting." And so I end up, I finally have my meeting. They approve it. They stick me in solitary for another like month, 1 to 2 months, I forget. But they stick me in there, and I was only supposed to be there for 14 days because I'm going to a minimum security prison camp.
Yeah.
Which is where I should have went to begin with, but they stuck me in with a bunch of sociopaths.
With the hardened killers.
So,
This guy has, I heard he had petri dishes. Oh man, put him in the shoe. That motherfucker, he's in the shoe. He's growing mushrooms.
And it's great because like when I went out there, like everyone knew me as the guy, like, Fitzy's right hand, like, so this dude who,
The Pablo Escobar of
and,
Tor.
yeah, like this dude, so I mean, I was more, it was absolutely an experience that it was well worth having. I'm kind of glad that they did that, because I met a lot of interesting people and I learned a lot of lessons. So I ended up I go out and like they have this thing called CARES Act, where because of COVID, they start looking at releasing people from federal prison. And like the thing is, they evaluate everyone, and everyone they evaluate, they're like, "Oh, you're definitely gonna get it. You're definitely gonna." And it's like 5% of the people actually get it, and then the staff tell you, "No, you were denied," and they love it. That's what they love. Telling people, "Oh, no, you're not going home."
Oh yeah, of course. They're the type of people that love to dwell in other people's misery. That's all law enforcement.
Yeah, I've went up to like the case manager's office, and I'm listening to him and the counselor in there laughing, listening to phone conversations about a guy telling his wife, "I'm coming home," and they know that guy. It's not going to happen. He got approved. He got approved. His family they're like, "Hey, here's the itinerary. Here's the plane tickets. Here's everything. It's all set. Guy hasn't been home in 10 years. You know what I mean?" And they're like laughing about, "Oh yeah, we're telling him today that shit ain't happening. You're doing another 5, asshole." I'm like, "Oh,
wow, that's
fucking
fucked
brutal.
up.
Fucking brutal, dude." So but like they love that shit. So and then like if that guy goes and kills someone, now they he's never getting out. It's another asset they get to hold on to for longer. So like I went in and they're like, "Oh, you're gonna get CARES Act," and I'm like, "Yeah." Right. So like when I got called into the office, I walk in and I'm the head orderly. So like I am in charge of all the other orderlies in that like facility. So like I can get away with a lot of shit, and that's why I took the job. Because I was bringing shit in and making money.
Yeah.
That's, what else are you going to do? It's fucking prison. So, like I just came from a high security environment. Now you put me in a fucking minimum where there's no fence. Like I'm sneaking out at night to go see my wife at the
Oh,
hotel. Like
geez.
that's
Nice.
what's going down, And I got a cell phone. My buddy's got a cell phone back there. So if you do a count, I'll be back in 3 minutes flat, and I'll get counted. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like my thing is OPSEC, and planning is my thing. So like to be dealing with OPSEC with a bunch of like rookies, it's like a fucking joke. It's like a mathematician, doing equations with a toddler. You know what I mean? So that was the only good part of it. So, but going into it, learning about law, like I ended up going to Blackstone Career Institute, which basically it's a it's an institute that basically you go and you learn paralegalism. And it's like
Okay.
multiple. It's got a bunch of accreditations to it. So like I was doing this course, I was learning about becoming a paralegal, studying federal law specifically, and like so they call me down, and I know, like I've heard these conversations with these cops laughing, like I'm so like I go down there and he's like, oh, we're gonna put you in for the CARES Act. I'm like, why are you fucking with my bid, man? And he's like, what? And I was like, why am I here? Like I'm not, I'm not qualifying for this shit. I was like, I got stuff to do, man. Like don't waste my time. You know what I mean? And he's like, oh, you thought you'd be happy? I was like, I don't give a fuck. I'm doing my bid. Like I don't, And he's like, oh, well, I'm putting you in regardless. And I'm like, all right, whatever. I was like, don't call me again about this nonsense, dude. So like I take off. And like 3 weeks later, I get called down again. And he's like, oh, the assistant warden approved you. The warden approved you. So now it's going to go to regional office. And I was like, I don't care, dude. Stop calling me. So like another week goes by, he calls me back. Oh, it got approved at region. Now it goes to DC. So I'm like, he's like, listen, U.S. probation's going to be going to your house to check it out, to make sure you got like a place to go. So I'm like, all right. So now I have to tell my wife,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like I call her up and I'm like, listen, like you might have United States probation coming through. I just want to let you know, you don't freak out when the feds show up. And she's like, oh, like that sounds great. Like, it's not. I'm like, listen, it's not going to happen. They do this just to fuck with people. Like, so like you have to explain to your family, like they do this for recreation. This is fun to them. I know it's like you, and she's like, oh, you can't be negative. I'm like, listen, it's reality. I'm not trying to be negative. I'm telling you how it's going to be, So, we both, by the end of it, we both ended up, because she's like, oh, half open, like, I love her. So it's like, that's what it is, man. You end up having that with her. And then, of course, what happens? They call you, oh, it was denied. And I was like, yeah, so why the fuck did you even tell me? Like, this is, so that's like, so it was like, so I call her up, I tell her, she's like, oh, whatever. She's like, why don't you, like, can you do anything? And I was like, I mean, yeah, like, I could file a motion. I could file a 3582, which is a compassionate release motion.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, well, do you know how to do it? And I was like, yeah. She's like, well, why don't you do it? And I was like, oh, it's just like a lot of work.
And
you know
how to do this because you were working as a paralegal, is what you're saying.
Because I was studying paralegalism and I was studying the law.
Paralegal. Okay, got it.
Right.
While you were in prison.
Right. And I had a natural interest in law because, so like, if you, for example, you see someone make a sick application, right, as an engineer, and your first thought is, how's that work, right? Like, you're like the kid who's taking apart all of mom's clocks to see how they work, right?
Yeah, of course.
And so, like, at the end of the day, like, that was me. I'm like, well, this language is what put me in prison. Like, the United States attorney knowing this language and being able to communicate in this alternate language, which, make no mistake, they're absolutely different language. And that's why, like, me and you go off like Webster's and Oxford Dictionary, and they go off of Black's Law Dictionary. They're different languages. So, like, going into it, like, and understanding that, I was like, well, if I learn how to code like they do, does that give me power?
It
And
does.
it
Yeah,
does,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
So I was like, I want to learn how to code like that, So that was me doing my case research, doing, that was why I did it, because I saw inherent power in that language that they used, the little twisted legalese language.
Hmm.
So I studied that, and with her encouragement, I applied that, and for me, I was like, you get to a point where you can't expect anything good to happen because it never does. So like I was like, I'm going to write this motion, but I'm going to write it for fun. Like I know whatever I write, the United States attorney, the guy who put me in here, he has to read it. Any
Yeah.
case that I put in here, he has to look up that case and see if that case got overturned. So I put in 350 different cases that I knew we'd have to look up, and I wrote 200 pages of
How
text.
long did that take you to put that together? I mean,
Months.
I guess all you
Yeah.
have time.
Yeah,
All you have is time there, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was probably all said and done. It was probably 6 months of work.
Holy crap. And that's
So it's a
6
book.
dedicated months. That's not like
Yeah,
6 months of you have like a 9 to 5 job and you have kids
yeah,
and you
yeah. So
taking
this
care of the
is so.
dog and you're doing your free time.
Yeah,
Like
I
you're
mean, you.
literally all day doing this.
Well, you have to, yeah, because so like, you're reading law for 12 hours a day. So like at the end of
Wow.
the day, the thing you have to remember is like we're not Stephen King writing a fiction book where it's off the
Yeah.
top of our heads. Anything we say, we need to be able to prove with case sites, and we need to be able to cite them right.
Yeah,
So
of
like
course.
and then we have to know like what are the prongs that need to be satisfied for this particular motion. How do you satisfy them? How can we prove that from in here? So like all these kind of things are the considerations that go into it. So like I wrote a ridiculously long motion that had, I mean, everything I wrote was legitimate, but like when I sent it in, I remember I sent it in, and the United States attorney has 14 days to respond. So this dude, he ended up taking 3 months to respond. So what he did was, I was like, all right, dude, like, I'm gonna give you. So I put in a motion and I wait. 14 days goes by, he hasn't said anything. So I'm like, okay, think about this. Like a civilian doesn't know what it's like for you as military police, right? Well, a federal judge doesn't know what it's like in a federal prison. He's never been there.
Yeah, of
So
course.
I was like, what if I can paint a
Not yet.
narrative? What if I can paint a narrative? What if I can be Stephen King and use a shitload of adjectives and describe the conditions inside of this box that I live in to him, to give him a good visual idea of the frustration and ignorance and the dangers that are in here when you're talking about COVID, as it relates to health issues. So that's what I did. So every time this guy did not write back in 14 days, I wrote a supplemental motion which updated the court on the death toll, the amount of people who had COVID, my health
Nice.
conditions, and I sent it in. And it's like, I would go and I would eat a ton of ramen noodle soups, and I wouldn't take a piss all day. And then when the nurse came, I'd say, "Hey, I feel dizzy," and she'd take my blood pressure, and it'd be skyrocketing, and they'd be like,
Because of
"Oh,
all the sodium.
you have really high blood pressure," and I'm like, "Yeah," and I'm like, "Oh, the CDC says." That's a severe risk factor for death from COVID. I got 5 years, not a life sentence. So these are the things, these are the bullets that you need to earn to be able to fire, to be able to try to get yourself out. So this is what you're
Yeah.
doing in order to try to get out. How bad do you want to get out of prison, man? You know what I mean? Are you willing to risk a heart attack for it?
So so eventually this paperwork gets processed
mhm.
and it actually gets approved and you
There's yeah, so yeah,
actually
he
get out.
hated it. He wrote, when he wrote back finally, he wrote 17 pages back, and 16 of them were the history of the case. They call it background. So
Wow.
it's like, Mr. Ben got convicted on this day. It's just nonsense. And then the last page was like, he wrote over 200 pages, blah, blah, blah. And he's just bitching about how long it was. So I have a chance to respond. So, of course, I do. So I respond back, and I'm like, the United States Attorney is right. It was over 200 pages. And that's because that's how much case law and facts I have to back up my side, unlike him, who could only
Yeah,
provide a page,
if anything that's credence to how much evidence there was that you were being, mistreated.
So, I mean, it was great, man. So, like, because of that, my judge ended up granting my compassionate release motion, and releasing me. So, I had been given 5 years. On that 5 years, I would have done like four and a quarter years,
Because of
like
good
4 years,
behavior.
4 years and 3 months with good time. Um, so my release date was 1/3/2024. Um, and I got released after about 18 months in prison, in federal prison, which is
They're gonna
absolutely
release you in
insane.
an election year, man. That's the worst.
Now it gets even crazier. So my judge came up with these things called Zulu factors. So
Uh,
really, really quick, Zulu factors are ways that a judge can look at a compassionate release motion. Doesn't matter what a compassionate release motion is, any of that, but he can look at a compassionate release motion and he can say almost automatically if you qualify or not without having to do any other work. So like there are like these 5 conditions, and it's not a law, but it's a judicial
it's
precedent.
like,
So it's
yeah, it's like benchmarks. It's like
yeah,
tests, right?
yeah,
Litmus
like it's not
tests.
something other judges have to abide by, but like my judge was the chief judge in Second Circuit, so he runs New York, Connecticut, and Vermont federal courts, right? So kind of an important guy. So he set this precedent where he's like the Zulu factors. Now, just one of these Zulu factors is like you have to do 50% of your time. And like in his ruling, he says if you do less than 50% of your time and you ask for a compassionate release, it's an insult to the judge who gave you that time,
Mhm.
because at the end of the day, they gave you that time for a certain reason, you know? And in my motion, I argued, yeah, I agree with that. But at the end of the day, you didn't anticipate me being locked in a cell 24 hours a day, for months at a time, not
With a
being able
deadly
to see
virus going
family,
around.
not being able to call family, having people die next to me with their lungs collapsing, that wasn't the punishment you thought I was going to have. So, because the punishment's more severe, then it should be for less time.
Sure.
And that's, there's 200 pages, so there's a lot to it. But so he made this precedent, right, of at
Mhm.
least 50% of your time, which was adopted nationally. So when I sent my motion in, I had done 35% of my time, and
Oh
he
man.
granted it. And he
Oh
granted it. He
wow.
he went against his own judicial precedent, and he was like, based on 3553A factors, which are like factors about who you are as a person. So he said basically because of who I was as a person, that I deserved to get out, and have like a second chance, because he was like, I don't see you ever, reoffending, and he's absolutely right about that, because it's a shit ROI.
Mhm.
People are like, oh, drug dealers don't pay taxes. I'm like, you're an idiot. Like at the end of the day, you get busted selling drugs, they're taking everything.
Yeah.
Federal forfeiture laws are a motherfucker. It's like, I have this remote. They're like, prove you didn't buy it with drug money or we're taking. You can't prove that. You know what I mean? The burden of
Yeah,
proof's on the
yeah. Show
prosecution.
me
What are
the
you
show me
talking
the
about?
receipt for your fucking DVD player from 2002.
So it's crazy, man. But like, so I got out. So I get out, and like I get out with this compassionate release motion. So I'm like, I have this natural passion, and I hate the federal prison system as a whole. There's definitely people that should be there. There's socio and psychopaths. Not debating that, but a lot of the people that are there, like, I really don't think that they should be. So, I was like, well, I don't have a lot of resources. I'm not wealthy or anything. So I'm like, how can I fight this monolithic system? And always the best way to fight. They always say the pen is mightier than the sword. So taking kind of that advice, like I went with that, and I wrote this. Now this is my
This
book,
is your book, Compassionate
on compassionate
Release.
release. Yeah.
Now, who
Um,
is this book intended for? I know that sounds like a stupid question, but I
no,
want to make
no,
sure
not at
that
all.
we're
Not
hitting
at
the right
all.
audience here.
So pretty much no one that we're talking to right now.
Well, it could be
it's
the family
it's
members, right?
absolutely, yeah, but it's such a
Yeah.
niche thing. So you have like 135,000 people
I
in
don't know,
federal
man.
prison
There's
right
some
now.
shady ass people in the infosec community. Might be right up their alley. Maybe your orders are gonna spike. Everybody's gonna start reading it.
So like my purpose for it was like, in here it lays out everything from like how to, how to start it, how to lay out the motion, what it should be in, like how to do the process with the BOP. How, different, so it's like case sites, I don't know if you can read that, but it's like all different case sites for different compassionate release motions, organized by like, so like this one, no confirmed cases means no cases of COVID in that facility, but they still got compassionate release. So it's like all these different arguing points that are organized into a fashion where no matter what their situation is, they can write a compelling case or motion to the federal courts, so they can fight for their freedom for the cost of a stamp, and obviously the book, but the cost of a stamp basically, because what'll happen is one guy will buy this and then it'll just circulate throughout the whole
They'll
prison.
pass it around.
Yeah, I already know how it works. But like 25% of compassionate release motions get granted, so that's pretty good odds, man. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
that's
Like,
pretty good. 1 in 4. I would take it if the alternative
yeah,
was sitting in prison, even a minimum
right,
security prison. I would
yeah,
take 25% odds.
right.
That's great.
Well, and the beautiful thing is, like, at the end of the day, you don't, like, you might not get released, but you can ask for a sentence reduction. You can you
Yeah.
can ask for home confinement. You don't have to, say just totally let me off. So the judge has options in that case. Like me, in my motion, I asked for everything. I was like,
Yeah.
listen,
Why not? I mean, if you
these are
don't
the
ask, you don't
options.
get.
Yeah, these are the options that you have.
Yeah.
Please choose to exercise at least one of them. And like, so in this, so I had the BOP cut me off from the law library. Yeah.
How is that legal?
It's not, but they don't care. It's their institution,
It's their
it's
game.
not. Yeah. So you'd be like, hey man, that's not legal. They'd be like, oh yeah, call the judge. Fuck out of here. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Good luck
So,
with that. Oh, what,
right.
you need a book to do that? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, exactly. So like with that, like if you can't get to the law library, you can't get the address of the federal courts. So like all that is in here. So every
Yeah.
state, all the case law, the whole process, all that stuff is in here.
That's
So
such a
even
great
if
resource.
even if they cut you off completely, you have a book that allows you to do that whole thing, even if you're locked in a cell 24/7, And the cool thing is like, I think I sell it. It's like the formatting on the ebook is fucked up. So yeah, like I don't have an editor or anything. So like all the cover design, the editing, like everything, literally everything from start to finish, was done solely by me, which is a really big undertaking.
Hell yeah, that
But
book is thick.
but like I didn't know what gutter margins were. I didn't know what anything was, but it was a really good learning experience, and it allowed me to arm a lot of people to be able to fight. So here's the thing. So I was like, even if these guys, like, they get this book, they write their motion, even if they don't succeed, what kind of attack is it when there's a bunch of information that's coming in? Right?
Yeah.
So I was like, worst case scenario, I can cause a small scale
Get a
DDoS.
DDoS. Human DOS, HDOS. Love it.
So I was like, and I don't know if I made the point in my book, but that's what they like. For me, my motives for writing that motion were just to mess with my United States attorney, literally.
I mean, so the way I look at it is, regardless your intention, the outcome, in my opinion, is that I believe wholeheartedly that the judicial system in our country it's an okay system, that it usually gets it right. That there are a lot of bad people out there that do bad things and that
Sure.
need to face justice. Okay. The system is not perfect by any means. It is the best system I think that our politicians at least could come up with. But there are mistakes that happen. There are people that get put away that don't need to be there, that are there
Sure.
by accident, or that are there wrongfully, that need all the help they can get. So
Yeah.
regardless what your intention was, this is an excellent resource for people to defend their rights. And I mean, just case in point, you look at the BOP denying you access to the library.
Yeah.
They know that knowledge is power. They know
Right.
that. They're like,
Right.
it's not even a question. Otherwise, they wouldn't do that.
Right.
They don't want to see people empowered that way because, it undermines the system. But I think that you wrote this book is such an awesome thing. It's such a good service, a humanitarian service. And I hope that you sell 1 million copies. I really do.
Yeah. So that's definitely not. So like this. Yeah, this was definitely just kind of like a work from the heart, I guess you'd say, like a compassionate project. And that's why I did it, is because like at the end of the day, there's so much misinformation and disinformation that those guys in there kind of have to sort through, that it makes it almost an impossible task. And a lot of them just say to hell with it. I'm just going to do my bid. And I was there. I was one of those guys. The only
Yeah.
reason that I didn't was because like my wife had my back and encouraged me to, just to keep
Good thing
fighting,
she
keep
was there.
swinging. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of
Good thing
those
she
guys, they don't
encouraged
have
you.
that. I think the divorce rate's like 95%. It's nuts.
I would imagine, yeah. It's like
So
50% military, so I can only imagine what it'd be in prison. It's
yeah,
probably way over 50% actually. No, I lied. Yeah, it's much higher. It's like 70 or 80, I think. It's the military. Well, maybe it depends if while we're at war. When I was in, it was really high. It was like everybody was getting divorced.
yep,
That was the thing. That was the thing to do. So, yeah, I can imagine in
yeah.
prison.
So I mean, my next book will probably be much more popular. It's gonna be a one that's on the darknet. It's gonna be probably. I see if I could do it just as thick. Have it
I'm
be a
sure you could.
comprehensive guide. you know,
Yeah,
um,
I'd
it'll
buy
be
it.
half. It'll be
I
like
love learning
half.
about Tor in the darknet. It's
Yep.
such an amazing beast to me. I mean, it's such an amazing blend of privacy, human rights, just enable like this freedom that you can do what you want, but most people try to choose to do the right thing. I like to believe
Yep.
that they try to use
Yep.
it. Like I use Tor all the time, but I don't
Yep.
use it to do anything illegal. Like I use it to
Right. Yeah, and
navigate
that's
to
the
sites that
beauty.
I don't want tracking my
Yes.
location.
Yes.
Like
Yep. And
there's
that's
plenty of
that's the beauty.
reasons.
The majority of people that are on the dark net have that use case,
Yeah.
where they're not using it to do criminal stuff. I'm definitely the minority. And that's one thing I like to hit upon whenever I talk to anyone is
Probably
like,
the
listen, this
minority of the
isn't.
minority, because I'm sure there's more
Yeah.
people buying than there are even selling. So
Well, that's and
yeah.
that's at the end of the day, that minority. I mean, that's what they call it, the dark net, right? It's not the deep web.
Yeah.
It's very specific. Totally different things. But like that said, the interesting thing now is, like we've seen Dread offline for almost a month, right?
Yeah.
And Hug Bunter made a post yesterday, where he's talking about how all the infrastructure is getting moved over. Then he made another post a couple hours ago, and he was talking about, he's requesting donations, because moving to this new infrastructure is pricey, and he doesn't like. There's no demand for people to pay money to use that infrastructure as it is.
Yeah.
And I had asked him, in that, on Dread Alerts, when the ETA was for them to be coming online. Like, is it going to be days? Is it going to be weeks? Is it going to be months? I mean, what are we looking at? I know, like, because he had said, like, I can't tell you when. I don't know when, but like, I'm like, dude,
Yeah.
like, we'd have a ballpark, and he was like, oh, like, it'll be like, I think he said by the end of the week or 2 weeks or something like that. So that'll be great. I know there's going to be a ton of people, but I think we're going to start seeing. I know D Snake from Alpha Bay was talking about, trying to tell people, like, start getting used to and using I2P. And I think with all the DDoS and the DOS attacks that are going down on Tor, that eventually we might see like a mass migration to I2P, from Tor, from those
That would be
those
interesting.
darknet users. And the really cool thing about that is people are like, oh well, all right, like let's say that happens, then I2P gets flooded. But I'm like, yeah, but because of how it's structured, like it's not just going to get flooded. The people that are hopping on it are part of that network now.
Hmm.
They're kind of like the nodes in the Tor. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, so that's kind of cool. And at the end of the day, I think we also have to remember, Tor and I2P are just two dark nets that exist. There's a lot of friggin' dark nets that are out there, man.
Oh yeah.
And that's the crazy thing at the end of the day. Like,
Web
I
3,
know.
I'm sure, will bring a whole new generation of this stuff too,
Yep.
as more serious engineers. I mean, like I'm a senior software engineer. I've been doing this for 10 years, and I would say I'm a serious engineer, and I'm definitely interested
Yeah.
in Web3 technology, in developing on the blockchain. I've definitely started exploring it myself. It's starting to bleed into my industry, and as more serious engineers get on board, you're going to see some wild shit start coming out
Yeah.
for Web3. I mean, because right now, you have the people that are on the fringe of the industry doing it, and I mean, not saying they're not brilliant people by any means, but just pure numbers. Like the more people you get
Hmm.
in there, the more minds you get in there, the cooler
Yeah.
stuff we're going to build. So yeah, I won't be shocked if there's a whole new internet born out of Web3.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, you see, I remember back when like Monero was like, 10, $15 a coin, and then I remember
Yeah,
when it jumped up to like 400 something. Um, and,
and then back down to
now,
50.
yeah. And like, yeah.
Unfortunately.
And now, I mean, but now it's so mainstream that you get stuff like Cake Wallet where, you can hop on, and, credit to Monero Talk. I didn't even know about this crap. But yeah, like Cake Wallet where like I can go on and any transaction that I'm about to do, like I can have almost like a gift card generated instantly for the exact amount of the transaction using Monero. And now all of a sudden I have privacy when I shop again.
Yeah,
And it's right in my phone, like
it's amazing all
it's
the stuff
awesome.
that's coming out now, man.
Yeah. Yep.
I think the least imaginative ideas are like just crypto loans and
Yes.
JPEGs, NFT JPEGs. Like those are the
Yep.
least uh, inspirational ideas. I am I am the biggest NFT supporter, surprisingly, because I don't. I mean, I think JPEGs as NFTs are the dumbest thing ever. I think that is the dumbest implementation on the planet. However, there are a million amazing implementations that have yet to be done. For example, when I buy a game online right now, any DLC I download for it, one, I can't trade my game. So if I download a game, I can't trade my game. And if I do find some way to trade my game, I can't send the DLC that I bought with it. However,
Right.
NFTs enable that. That's just one of like a million
Yep.
things. How about app stores or music stores like iTunes? What
Yep.
percentage are they taking from content creators? They're taking
Hmm.
massive amounts. It's like
Yeah.
30 to 70% in some
Yeah.
cases
Even
that they're
YouTube,
taking.
man. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
YouTube. I mean, I get super thanks from people every now and like I'm about to put up a Cash App and other stuff because like at the end of the day, like if you send me like $10 as a super thanks, like YouTube takes like 60% of it. It's just
exactly.
like,
Right. So now imagine instead of going through YouTube, we have some Web3 platform where the
yep.
content creator gets 99%. And then
Yep.
since it's an automated system that lives on the blockchain,
Yep.
maybe 1% goes to the people processing these transactions,
Yep.
just as a thank you. And those people will be happy. The content creator will own everything. You'll know that you're getting genuine content from that content creator and not some secondhand shit. Or
Right.
if you did, maybe you sell your book on there and the person reads it and they're done with it and they want to resell it for half
Hmm.
as much. You could
Yeah.
charge royalties on that stuff.
That's
um
awesome. Yeah.
I mean, there's so many things. I mean, you would talk about people that live in other countries. Like we have a pretty good land ownership tracking system here in the United States, which we take for granted. But there's a lot of people in third world nations where land tracking is a piece of paper. And if somebody kill you and take paper, they own land, kind of thing,
Yep.
where when you think about like smart contracts and things like that, we can start using NFTs to track land ownership. I mean, dude, the list goes on and on and
Yeah.
on. I could talk all day about
Yeah,
Web3.
I mean, like as even like a I think some of the developments that the most recent one I think I learned about vis-a-vis like kind of darknet markets was there's a like a peer-to-peer decentralized network now on GitHub for Monero, and
That's awesome.
it's kind of like do you remember Open Bazaar? Do you ever
Yeah,
see anything about that? So it's like
yeah,
an Open Bazaar 2.0 but with Monero.
interesting.
That's so
Yeah,
I like I learned about that the other day. I was like, that's sick. Like I loved Open Bazaar. I was so disappointed to see it, flop. Man, that sucks so bad. It's like that's it for exit scams. Like now you can have impartial arbitration between disputes between vendors and buyers. You can have third party escrow.
oh
Um,
yeah,
and you can choose your escrow service like and like with capitalism the typically the most strongest competitors rise to the top. So you'd have some serious some serious people out there that would be doing stuff like that. And because it's all Monero, it's like centered around privacy. That's phenomenal.
Wow. All
Yeah,
right.
man, like definitely some
That
exciting stuff going on.
there, yeah, I could talk all day about crypto. Sam Bent, if people want to find you, if people want to know more about you, if they want to get
Hmm.
involved with what you're doing, if they want to help you out, they want to donate to you to help your cause, if they want to buy your book, where can they find you?
Yeah, so probably the easiest place is either my website, which is doingfedtime.com, or at my YouTube, which is it's the channel is Doing Fed Time. I have another YouTube, excuse me, called Two Happy Times Too, which I just started more recently. It's like a lot of the stuff in Doing Fed Time is kind of specific content for that channel. So the Two Happy Times Two stuff's more practical, hands-on stuff for different stuff. But yeah, those two locations, and Twitter at Doing Fed Time.
Sam, it's been great talking to you, man.
Thank you.
I'm so thankful that we were able to sit down. I knew that your story was going to be amazing. I know people are going to love to hear it. Thank you so much for taking time to do
Of
this. I
course.
really appreciate
Thank you
it.
for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, Sam. Thank you.